the days when our minds are constantly stretched thin by work, worries, and scattered fragments of thought that refuse to settle, it becomes so easy to feel as though we are drifting in a chaotic current with no clear beginning and no certain end. At night, instead of finding peace, we face the nameless whispers of our own inner voice. But here, in this softened moment, I invite you to step into another kind of journey. Gentler, deeper, a journey through 60 psychological mind games, the subtle mechanisms of the mind that we often fail to recognize, yet they quietly shape the way we feel, the way we love, and the way we exist. Let this quiet narration guide you through a space where philosophy meets psychology, where each reflection opens a small door leading back into the inner self. As Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So now, release your tension, slow down, look deeply into the stillness within. Allow these lines of contemplation to gently cradle you into sleep, and perhaps, within that softness, you may touch something truly meaningful. When night falls and the world around us slowly quiets, there is something deeply natural about letting the mind drift into the most hidden chambers of consciousness. The stillness of the night feels like a thin doorway, gently opening to lead us into places that, during the day, buried beneath busyness and invisible pressures, we cannot quite reach. Perhaps that is why nighttime is when humanity's oldest questions return. Who am I? Why do I exist? And is the world I see truly as real as I believe? These questions, though they appear as soft as mist, carry within them the weight of thousands of years of reflection from philosophers, thinkers, and great psychologists, those who spent their lives looking past the artificial calm of everyday existence. In this space, I want to invite you into a very different kind of journey, one that asks for no effort, no goal, no need to explain or prove anything at all. Just relax, listen, and allow these streams of reflection to move through you like warm water. Because some questions are not born to be answered. They are born to open the doorway back into the essence of who we truly are. Tonight, we begin a journey into philosophical paradoxes, the strange fragments of thought that leave the mind both bewildered and quietly awakened in ways you might not expect. Entering this world is like stepping into a dark room lit only by the faint glow of a single candle. Each paradox is a small flame, illuminating a new layer of awareness. They do not promise a final answer, but they will guide you deeper into the things you believed you already understood. Perhaps Socrates was right when he admitted, "I know that I know nothing." An admission that seems paradoxical, yet frees the human spirit from the illusion of certainty, the most honest beginning for any true journey into wisdom. Let yourself step into that moment, a moment where the roles you carry throughout the day fall away, where expectations dissolve, where you no longer need to be strong or perfect. Here, there is only you, your simplest, rawest, truest self. To begin such a journey, we first move through darkness, not the darkness of the outer world, but the darkness of ambiguity within the mind, where familiar things begin to shimmer with a strange new light. The ancient philosophers understood that to comprehend light, one must first look directly into the dark. Plato, in Allegory of the Cave, described humans as prisoners bound inside a cavern, seeing only the shadows of objects and mistaking those shadows for the entire world. And we are not so different. We live inside our assumptions, in memories edited by our own minds, in emotions we cannot explain, in limits we mistakenly believe are real. But if we allow ourselves to sink gently into stillness, into the softness of the night, we may begin to notice faint cracks of light glimmering on the walls of our own cave. And as we follow those traces of light, we enter the realm of paradoxes, where the things we were certain of become fragile, and the things we once doubted become strangely clear. This is the moment when the mind opens, not to strain for understanding, but to simply feel. The magic of paradoxes does not lie in their power to confuse us, but in their subtle reminder that human perception has limits, that the world is far larger than the stories we tell ourselves, that sometimes contradiction itself is where the most delicate truths are hidden. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. A little chaos in the mind is natural, and from that very chaos, new stars of insight begin to form." When we allow ourselves to walk into the wild terrain of paradoxes, we also allow ourselves to meet the deepest parts of our being, the parts we lose in the noise, the parts we overlook when we are rushing, afraid, or simply overwhelmed. Imagine your mind as a quiet lake at night. Every hurried thought, every worry, every noise is like a ripple disturbing the reflection of the sky on its surface. But when you sit still, breathe softly, and allow everything to settle, the lake becomes calm. And in that calm, the sky reveals itself with perfect clarity. Paradoxes are like stars on that night sky, visible only when the mind becomes quiet enough. Tonight, in the gentle warmth of stillness, you do not need to seek answers. Just let the paradoxes drift through you like soft currents. Sometimes they may awaken something ancient and deep within you. Sometimes they may simply bring a sense of lightness, like an exhale after a long and tiring day. Either way, they will bring you closer to yourself, closer to the questions you have long avoided, yet are perhaps the very questions that hold the power to heal. Each paradox, each question, is the mind whispering to itself, much like what Jung once wrote. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. When you turn inward, not to judge, but to listen, you step onto the path that leads to awakening. So, in this moment, gently close your eyes and let your breath carry you into a wider, deeper, warmer space. A space where there is no need to chase anyone, no need to become a better version of yourself, no need to prove anything at all. A space where you simply exist, just as you are. And from that simple presence, we begin to expand awareness, like one candle passing its flame to another. Every paradox is a candle, every word a small movement of light. Together, we will walk softly through them, like a traveler moving through the night, watching warm lanterns flicker awake in a distant town. And then, when the mind has opened just enough, softened just enough, we arrive at the first paradox. The ship of Theseus, where the question, "Are we truly ourselves?" begins to glow. And that will become the threshold into part 2, where the layers of identity gently unfold, revealing the quiet story of what it truly means to be human. And like a gentle stream of thought flowing softly from part 1, where your mind had settled, opened, softened like the surface of a lake slowly smoothing itself, we now step toward another doorway in tonight's quiet journey. An old doorway, ancient yet never forgotten, forever haunting the human spirit. Ship of Theseus, the paradox of identity. When you have slowed enough, breathed enough, released enough of the noise inside you, this becomes the perfect moment to sink deeper into the question humanity has carried for thousands of years. What makes me still me? A question that appears simple, yet the more we gaze into it, the more it opens into endless corridors of philosophy, psychology, memory, time, and consciousness. Let me take you into that story, gently, like a candle's flame slowly burning. Imagine you are standing before an ancient ship, a vessel that has crossed storms, seas, and time itself, as if it were the silent witness of countless souls who once stepped upon its deck. They call it the Ship of Theseus, a legend in philosophy, a question about identity, a mirror reflecting our own being. And the problem begins here. Over many years, the ship begins to decay. One plank is replaced, then another. Old masts are renewed, year by year, decade by decade, until one day not a single original piece of wood remains. Yet people still call it by its old name. They still believe it is the same ship. So, is it? And when this question echoes, it does not merely touch wooden planks. It touches every cell in your body, every fragment of memory, every small transformation you have undergone throughout your life. Because you yourself are a ship like that. Not a single cell in your body is the same as the ones you had 7 to 10 years ago. Memories have faded. Beliefs have changed. Wounds have healed. Habits have shifted. Dreams have died. And new dreams have quietly taken their place. So, are you still the you of yesterday? Or are you simply a new version rebuilt upon the ashes of all your former selves? This is why the Ship of Theseus paradox sits so deeply at the core of identity. It is not asking about philosophy. It is asking about you. And if you let your mind drift a little slower, you'll begin to see that this question isn't meant to be answered. It's meant to be felt, observed, touched with a quiet awareness moving within you right now. Because in the flow of time, in the constant reconstruction of the mind, something curious happens. We still feel like the same person. Why? Is it memory that holds us together? Or the story we tell ourselves about who we are? Or is it merely the illusion of continuity? The same illusion that makes us believe a film is a seamless motion, when it is actually 24 separate images flashing quickly enough that we never notice the gaps. David Hume, the skeptical philosopher of Scotland, once wrote, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." A treatise of human nature. He could not find a stable self within him, only streams of sensations, thoughts, and memories endlessly passing by, without a center, without a core, without a fixed entity to call I. And if that is true, then the Ship of Theseus is not a story about an object. It is a story about us, human beings changing each day while clinging tightly to the illusion of an unchanging self. But if memory forms the foundation of identity, what happens when memory is distorted, lost, or rewritten? Are you still you if one day your memories vanish? Modern neuroscientists say memory is not storage. It is reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you rewrite it. You replace an old plank with a new one. Your identity is not an artifact. It is a process, a flow, a continuous unfolding. And yet, humans crave a fixed point, a center, an anchor. We don't want to believe we are only a river forever moving. We want to believe we are the bowl containing that river. But Heraclitus awakened humanity thousands of years ago with a single sentence. No man ever steps in the same river twice. Fragments. You never touch the same water. And the you who steps into it is not the same either. Perhaps identity is nothing more than a river without an owner. There is a truth soft as mist yet heavy as stone. You are no longer the 5-year-old who cried when you fell. You are no longer the teenager who dreamed impossible dreams. You are no longer the person from 5 years ago, the one who believed in something you no longer believe. The one who loved someone you no longer feel anything for. The one who feared something you can now smile at. Layers of you have fallen away like the shedding of old bark. Yet if you close your eyes, breathe slowly, and listen deeply, you can still sense a faint continuity, a thread connecting the you of yesterday to the you of today. What is that thread? Consciousness? Memory? The story you tell about yourself? Or simply a beautiful illusion the brain creates to give you stability in a world of constant change? Daniel Dennett once called the self a center of narrative gravity. Not an object, but a concept shaped by the story you craft about your life. Change the story, and the identity changes. Rewrite the past, and the present transforms. Choose forgiveness, healing, release, and you reshape your very being. Yet the most beautiful part of the ship of Theseus paradox is this. It gives you permission to be renewed. If the ship can replace every plank and still continue its journey, then so can you. You can change the way you think, the way you love, the way you see life, and you are still you. Not because you remain unchanged, but because you are the ever-changing flow. In truth, the only constant in your life is the ability to change. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. You are not the old planks. You are the one replacing them. You are the invisible hand deciding where the ship will go." So what then is you? Perhaps you is movement, process, life itself. You exist as a dance between what has been and what is becoming. No clear beginning, no clear end. You are a journey, a river, a ship sailing forward even as every part of it transforms. And the beauty is, you don't need to find an answer. Just let the question rest in your chest like a warm stone. It will lead you to where you need to go. Now, in the stillness of the night, as your breath deepens, softens, loosens, we gently step toward another question, one that has followed humanity since the dawn of thought. Are we truly free, or are all our choices illusions? And so, from the reflections on identity, on the ship of Theseus and every plank quietly replaced over time, we drift softly into another region of philosophy, deeper, broader, and filled with contradictions that have stirred human thought for thousands of years. A region debated by ancient philosophers and modern scientists alike, by religion and quantum physics, by psychology and cosmology. A region that questions not only who we are, but whether we are truly free to become what we choose. And as this current of awareness continues flowing without interruption, I invite you to step into part 3. Free will versus determinism, the illusion of choice, where questions that seem familiar suddenly open into a vast abyss of human understanding. Slow your breath for a moment, because you're about to enter a paradox that may very well be shaping your thoughts right now, without you even knowing. Perhaps from the moment humans began to think, we have believed in choice. We believe we choose where to go, who to love, what to do with our lives. This belief in free will is one of the strongest foundations that give us a sense of value, responsibility, and inner strength. But then, philosophy and science emerge. And in the stillness of tonight, you may begin to see that the question is not as simple as it appears. Are we truly free? Or are we merely the inevitable outcome of an unbroken chain of causes stretching back to the birth of the universe? Even the fact that you are listening right now, feeling calm, sleepy, or curious, may have been shaped entirely by forces outside your control. Memories, past experiences, neural patterns, genetics, environment, temporary emotions, and countless subtle influences. Strict determinist philosophers argue that everything, every breath, every heartbeat, Every thought is the unavoidable result of prior conditions. If one could know the complete state of the universe at any single moment, down to the position of every particle and every memory in your mind, then the entire future could be predicted. This belief was so powerful that mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace imagined the famous Laplace's demon, a hypothetical being capable of knowing all things and therefore foreseeing everything that would ever happen. If that were true, free will would be nothing more than an illusion. But modern science places another shard into the picture: the butterfly effect. A tiny change in the past can ripple into massive differences in the present. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, as Edward Lorenz once described, could set off a tornado in Texas. This raises another profound question. If the future is so fragile, so sensitive, so chaotic, is there a narrow passage through which human freedom might slip? Or does this chaos simply show how little control we truly have? Determinism tells us everything is decided. Chaos theory tells us everything is sensitive and unpredictable. Psychology tells us most of what we do arises from the unconscious, beyond our awareness. Existential philosophy tells us humans are free, and this freedom is the very source of our anxiety. So which one is true? Or are they all merely fragments of a truth we are not yet ready to face? Let your mind ripple gently, like a drop falling into a silent lake. In this space, we are not searching for answers. We are simply letting ourselves feel the question. Think back to the choices you have made in your life. The moment you chose a field of study, chose to love someone, to leave something behind, or even the simple choice to sit and listen to this narration. If you ask yourself why, you might generate many reasons, but are those reasons truly your own? Or were they shaped by your past, by your fears, by a wound you no longer remember, by genetics, environment, or memories buried beyond your conscious reach? Sigmund Freud once wrote, "Unconscious motives are what shape most of our actions." The interpretation of dreams. If most of our behavior is driven by the unconscious, then the free will we believe in is merely the feeling that arises after the choice has already been made. A story the conscious mind tells itself. But this does not make us lesser. It only makes us human. Now let us shift to another layer of this paradox: neuropsychology. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet's experiments delivered a revelation that stunned the world. The brain initiates action before we consciously feel the intention to act. What we think of as our decision comes after the brain has already begun the process. Yet Libet also believed we possess the ability to veto the impulse, to stop an action before it is carried out. We may not fully choose our impulses, but we can choose how we respond. We are not entirely free, but we are not entirely controlled. We are the witness, the judge, the one who decides whether to allow the impulse to unfold or not. Human freedom may be humble, subtle, a fleeting pause of awareness capable of reshaping an entire life. And when we return to the great question, am I free? Perhaps the most beautiful truth is this: maybe we are not fully free, but we can shape the meaning of our lives. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Man is condemned to be free, being and nothingness." It is paradoxical, but deeply true. Humans are condemned to be free because we must accept responsibility for our own existence. Whether or not we believe in fate, we must still live as though our decisions matter. The meaning of life is not about how much freedom we possess, but about how we choose to live with the freedom we do have. You did not choose where you were born, nor the family you were born into. You did not choose the wounds or memories you inherited, but you are free to choose how you walk with them. You did not choose your past, but you can choose your response to it. You did not choose the thoughts that arise spontaneously, but you can choose which ones to nurture. Thus, human freedom lives not in the external world, but in the quiet space within. So in this night's gentle silence, let yourself soften, light as a breeze. You do not need to prove you have free will, nor fight against the question. Simply allow it to move through you, the way it moved through the ancient philosophers. And if you listen more deeply, you may sense how the question itself draws you closer to your own essence, tenderly, quietly. Because in the end, the question of free will is not a question about the universe. It is a question about your life, how you want to live, who you wish to become, and what spirit you choose to carry forward. Tonight, the answer does not need to be clear. It only needs to be felt, as a small, delicate shift in awareness, a gentle knowing that you are neither entirely bound nor entirely free. You are the meeting place of both. Another paradox, perhaps the most beautiful paradox of all. And now, as your mind settles further, your breath deepens and your thoughts soften, we begin drifting toward the next realm of contemplation. A realm where tiny disturbances can reshape the world, where time ceases to be linear, and where the slightest shift in the past may rewrite the entire present. As the reflections on freedom and determinism from Part 3 settle like the soft sound of waves pulling back from a nighttime shore, you may notice a new quiet forming within you, wider, gentler, as though the mind has opened an inner space tender enough to welcome questions even deeper. And in that hush, we step into Part 4, where time is no longer just an invisible river, but a fragile mirror reflecting every subtle movement of the universe, where even the smallest tremor can redirect the entire path of a life. This is where we touch the butterfly effect, one of the most delicate yet unsettling ideas ever conceived, because it reminds us that both past and future are as thin as breath, and that the smallest, most ordinary moments may carry the power to reshape everything. Let yourself breathe softly, slowly, the way a butterfly stirs the air with a single trembling wing. Because from this moment, every thought you touch has the potential to open an entire universe within you. The butterfly effect begins with a question that seems almost innocent. Can the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? Hidden beneath this simple question is the truth that in complex systems, weather, the human mind, the flow of history, even the tiniest shift can lead to an entirely different outcome. Edward Lorenz, the father of chaos theory, discovered this when a small rounding error in a weather simulation produced a completely different forecast, shocking him so deeply he gave life to that now famous image of the butterfly. But here, in this stillness, we are not talking about mathematics. We are talking about your life, about the small, quiet gestures you once believed meaningless, yet somehow they wove themselves into the long story you now carry, a story impossible to unwind. Think of a moment so small you forgot it ever happened. A sleepless night leading you to click on a philosophy video. A late morning that forced you to take a different route. A single glance that made your heart hesitate. A careless word that left a bruise you didn't expect. A sudden rain that pushed you into a cafe you'd never planned to enter. Small things, light as dust, passing like wind. Yet as time moves, you look back and realize it was precisely those unnoticed moments, unrecorded, unnamed, uncelebrated, that altered the entire shape of your life. The butterfly effect reminds us that the past is not a solid stone. It is a river, and one gentle ripple can redirect its course. A chance encounter may lead to love. A tiny choice may lead you to a new career. A brief moment of hesitation may save you from a mistake. A small kindness may brighten someone's entire day or their entire lifetime in a way you will never witness. Nietzsche once wrote in "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. If inner chaos is necessary to create stars, then perhaps it is within the unpredictable, fragile moments the universe places along our path that the grandest futures quietly emerge." Albert Camus wrote in Return to Tipas, "In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer, and often it is the smallest things, a soft breeze, a fleeting memory, a delicate instant, that become the birthplace of that invincible summer inside you." When we look closely at the butterfly effect, we understand that human beings are not shaped by monumental moments, but by subtle, tender movements that drift through our lives like breath. A small shift in how you view something may heal an old wound. A gentler thought about yourself may open a quiet door into the future. A small act of forgiveness may calm an entire sky within you. And the most beautiful part of the butterfly effect is not the fragility of the past, but the vastness of the present. If the past can reshape the future through a single small tremor, then right now, in this moment, you too can place a butterfly upon your life. By breathing more slowly, releasing one heavy thought, setting down one burden you no longer need, or simply choosing to be kinder with yourself. In the stillness of night, every small choice carries a power of soothing, because it reshapes not only the future, but the way you experience yourself in this very moment. And when you recognize this, you understand that you are not as powerless as you once believed. You do not need to do anything grand to alter your destiny. You only need to begin with the smallest gesture, a soft thought, a slow inhale, a gentle tenderness toward your own heart. The beauty of the butterfly effect lies in this. It returns to you the power of every moment. It reminds you that no action is meaningless. No second is empty. No choice is too small to change something. And as your mind grows lighter, as your heart softens like water gliding through silence, you may sense something rare, a harmony between past, present, and future. No longer three separate points, but one continuous, delicate movement like breath. The fragile past no longer frightens you. The uncertain future no longer presses on your chest, because you know that with just one quiet flutter in the present, the entire world within you can shift, and in that realization, you become gentle enough to step into the next realm of philosophy, where time not only becomes fragile, but may even bend upon itself, where cause can arrive after effect, where loops of impossibility make the human imagination tremble. This is where we move toward Part 5. The grandfather paradox and reverse causality, one of the strangest and most enchanting paradoxes in our entire journey tonight. And as the reflections on the butterfly effect from Part 4 continue to ripple softly through your mind, like the last gentle waves on a still lake after a butterfly has stirred the air, you may begin to notice something strange. The more you contemplate the fragility of time, the more you realize that time does not obey a straight line as we once believed. It is more like a ribbon, soft and fluid, sometimes tightening, sometimes bending, sometimes looping back into itself, and precisely in the moment when your mind opens to the delicacy of these small shifts, we step into a deeper, wider paradox, one that speaks not only of fragility, but of the disorder of causality itself, where causes can come after effects, where the story of the universe does not begin at point A and end at point B, but folds into a closed loop. This is where we enter the grandfather paradox and reverse causality. A paradox so bewildering that even the most brilliant minds must pause before the strange beauty of time. Let your breath slow just a little more, for this paradox is like a doorway into a labyrinth, and we must walk through it with steps as quiet as our own inner stillness. The grandfather paradox begins with an image that is deceptively simple. If you travel back in time and somehow prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, then yous, standing now in the present, could never be born. But if you were never born, how could you go back to stop them? And if you did not go back, then your grandparents would indeed meet, you would be born, and you would return to stop them, an endless loop with no beginning and no end, like the Ouroboros, the ancient serpent that devours its own tail. And in the instant you try to answer this puzzle, you sense the true strangeness of the paradox. It is not merely about time travel. It is about the very nature of cause and effect. It is about the way your life moves through invisible spirals. It is about what you have done, what you will do, and what you believe you have chosen, though perhaps those choices were shaped by a deeper loop you cannot see. Reverse causality goes even further. It suggests that an effect may occur before its cause, that you may feel a premonition before the event arrives, that the choices of your future may already be pulling you toward them in the present, like the gravity of a distant planet you cannot yet see but somehow feel. That what you call intuition may be fragments of a signal sent from another timeline. In quantum physics, this idea appears as retrocausality, where a particle may be influenced by an event that happens after it. Humans have tried to explain this with mathematics, with physics, with philosophy, but sometimes the gentlest explanation arises from silence. Some things do not need to be understood in order to exist, and in that silence, you may feel something subtle. Your own life also moves through spirals like these. Sometimes an event in the present answers a question you never thought to ask in the past. Sometimes an old wound opens the path toward a future growth you never imagined. Sometimes you feel pulled toward a choice, a person, a turning point, as if the future is calling you, inviting you, shaping you into who you will become. If you look closely at what has led you here, you will see that your life has never been a straight line. It is a labyrinth where every step leads you into corridors you never expected. And the strangest part is, those steps, whether winding, looping back, or surging forward, always guide you to exactly where you need to be. Not necessarily where you wanted to be, but where you needed to become the you who exists right now. This is the beauty of paradox. It does not demand comprehension. It simply reminds you that some parts of life do not follow the rules you are used to. Because a part of you belongs to the future, a part belongs to the past, and your entire being moves within the present. The past is not still. The future is not quiet. They lean into each other, fold into each other, entwine like the spiraling strands of time's DNA. If the butterfly effect in Part 4 made time feel fragile, then the grandfather paradox makes time feel elastic, fluid, and elusive beyond the boundaries of human imagination. Nietzsche once wrote in The Will to Power, "There are no facts, only interpretations." If that is true, then perhaps time itself is only an interpretation of what happens. Who can say that cause must come before effect? Who can say that your actions today are not responses to something your future self already knows? Who can claim that a destined encounter is not the intersection of two different causal loops converging onto a single moment that has been quietly arranged by movements no eye can perceive? In the night, when everything is silent, you can feel this more clearly. Memories rise, not to hurt you, but to open a new way of seeing. Decisions you are considering become clearer, not because you have chosen, but because something ahead is breathing softly toward you. Emotions that once confused you reveal their shapes, as if the labyrinth within your mind is suddenly dimly lit. And if you let yourself drift deeper into this stillness, you will see that the grandfather paradox is not here to confuse you. It is here to show you that life is not linear. And when you stop forcing everything to align in a straight line, you begin to notice softer, wiser, more intricate patterns. The patterns that only the quiet of night can reveal. In this stillness, you understand that there are things you cannot change, but you can understand them. Things you cannot revisit, but you can make peace with them. Things you cannot control, but you can smile at them the way one smiles at a paradox. Not to solve it, but to accept it as a natural part of existence. And in that acceptance, you become lighter, because you realize that everything in your life holds a reason, even if that reason is unwritten, unseen, or not yet fully understood. But it is there, like the whisper of the universe. Now, as you float within the current of these paradoxes, as your mind grows soft, quiet, and open, we drift toward the next realm, where questions of identity and time begin to weave into each other, where continuity and change collide like stars meeting in the night. And as the reflections on causality from Part 5 continue to resonate within you like the final low note of a fading melody, you may begin to realize that what makes these paradoxes profound is not only the nature of time itself, but the way human beings receive, mirror, and echo the world around them. Because even if time bends into impossible loops, even if cause dissolves into effect and effect bleeds back into cause, our emotions, our connections, and the ways we reflect one another remain the invisible threads guiding our lives in ways science cannot always grasp. And as you gently drift out of the spirals of causality, something new begins to unfold, softer, closer, yet deeper than most people ever realize. This is where we step into the mirror effect, the phenomenon in human interaction where subtle imitation becomes the quiet bridge that builds trust, empathy, and belonging. Let your breath slow just a little more, as though you are preparing to look into a mirror, not with your eyes, but with your awareness. The mirror effect is woven into the earliest instincts of our species. Long before we had words, we had imitation. A child smiles when an adult smiles, frowns when an adult frowns, and as we grow older, this instinct does not disappear. It simply becomes quieter, more subtle, moving inward until it operates so gently we no longer notice it. Humans mirror one another's breathing, pacing, tone of voice, the way they place their hands, the angle at which they tilt their heads, even the emotional currents beneath the face. And the strange beauty of this is, we feel safer, more connected, more trusting when someone unconsciously mirrors us. It is as though the soul recognizes harmony before the mind ever understands it. Psychologists call this subtle mimicry. But tonight, we are not looking at it through the cold lens of science. We are looking at it the way philosophy looks at the world, as the reflection of one consciousness into another, as a quiet doorway into the truth that no one among us is truly alone. Because in every shared gesture, every synchronized breath, every small nod or simultaneous silence, we reflect one another like two mirrors facing each other, creating infinite layers of who we are. Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "He who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he thereby become a monster." Though he spoke of the shadows within humanity, his words whisper another truth. We become what we reflect. We become what we witness, absorb, and echo from the souls beside us. A single frown can transmit tension. A soft smile can spread through a room like a gentle breeze. A quiet sigh can pull the atmosphere downward. Every emotion ripples, amplifies, and moves from one spirit to another through invisible threads of resonance. But in the opposite direction, the mirror effect can also be a quiet form of healing. When you sit with someone calm, you feel your heartbeat soften. When you are with someone who listens, you notice your own mind settling. When you are near someone unhurried, your breath naturally slows. And in those moments, you may sense something tender. We do not merely live beside one another, we live within one another. The mirror effect is proof that human beings share a common vibration, a shared rhythm, a resonance deeper than language can touch. In the stillness of memory, you may recall someone whose mere presence brought you peace. They did not need to speak. They only breathed gently, nodded softly, looked at you without judgment, and you felt held. That is not coincidence. In them, there was stillness. And in that stillness, you saw your own. In them, there was steady breath, and that breath became yours. When they were gentle, you softened. When they were serene, you found your own calm rising quietly from within. The mirror effect is not simply imitation, it is interference and resonance. It is the blending of energies, emotions, presence. The psychologist Carl Rogers once said, "What is most personal is most universal." And perhaps the mirror effect is the living example of that truth. The most private parts of you, your tenderness, your uncertainty, your softest vibrations, are precisely what others feel first. Not through words, but through microscopic interactions occurring constantly without your awareness. And beneath this lies an even deeper, more philosophical truth. The mirror effect shows that your identity is not formed solely from within. It is shaped by those you have met, those whose eyes you have looked into, those whose spirits have brushed against yours. You are not a solitary entity. You are the result of countless reflections, countless encounters that molded you in ways you never noticed. In every person you have known, a part of you remains, and within you, there are pieces of every soul you have ever touched. In the quiet of this night, you may feel this more clearly. Every person you once loved, trusted, resented, admired, or exchanged a few sentences with, they all still echo inside you. They left gestures, habits, thought patterns, wounds and beauties that you continue to carry. And even now, as you listen to these slow, gentle words, you are reflecting them, letting them settle into you like moonlight sinking into still water. The mirror effect also teaches us the power of presence. When you are truly with someone, not distracted, not divided, you become a clear mirror in which they can see themselves. And sometimes, what they need is not advice, but the chance to see a peaceful version of themselves reflected through your calmness. In such moments, you become a sanctuary, a space where another person can return to their truest self, not because of what you say, but because your stillness reminded them of their own. The ancient philosophers called humans animals sociable, social beings. But they were not merely speaking of coexistence, they were speaking of reflection. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, yet the soul is also dyed with the colors of every soul it has touched." And in that idea, the mirror effect becomes a path of healing. By becoming softer, slower, more compassionate, you do not only transform yourself, you transform everyone who reflects in you. Now, as the mirror effect spreads softly through your mind like a thin layer of morning light, you may feel the inner world growing quieter, wider, brighter. And from that brightness, we drift toward another realm of psychology. Deeper, sharper, where subtler forms of influence emerge, where human beings not only reflect one another, but shape one another in unpredictable ways. And as the reflections on the mirror effect from Part 6 continue to glow softly within you like a gentle halo, you may begin to sense that the inner world does not move only through reflection, but through subtler, quieter currents. Movements so delicate they vanish unless we slow down enough to feel them. These currents, unlike the mirror effect, do not merely connect us. They slowly open the doors we never intended to open. And it is from that softness of reflection that we drift into another psychological realm. More intricate, more nuanced, carrying both the fragrance of persuasion and the shadows of manipulation. A technique humans use constantly, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, to ease others into moving in the direction they desire. This is where we step into the foot in the door technique, where a single small request, seemingly harmless, becomes the opening through which larger, deeper, harder to refuse requests quietly enter. And if you let your breath settle for a moment, you may feel that this technique is not just a social tactic. It is a mirror of how the human soul opens itself to change. Foot in the door was formally discovered in social psychology, yet it existed long before we had a name for it. Its mechanism is so simple that everyone understands it, yet so deep that everyone has been shaped by it without realizing. Once a person agrees to a small request, they are more likely to agree to a larger one that follows. This is not because they are forced, but because the mind seeks consistency with its earlier decision. Consistency, a word that seems ordinary, yet directs countless human behaviors. Once you say yes the first time, the second is easier, the third even easier still. And just as a door need only be cracked open a little to reveal the world behind it, a tiny moment of agreement can open the path toward profound shifts in how you think, feel, and respond. But what makes foot in the door truly worth contemplating, especially in the stillness of night, is not its ability to persuade others, but the way it reflects the inner unfolding of our own hearts. Because it is not only others who use this technique on you. You use it on yourself. You do not change in a single leap. You change in small steps, small decisions, passing thoughts. You grow stronger not through a dramatic moment, but through hundreds of quiet victories over fear. You let go of a person, a memory, a sorrow, not all at once, but through countless subtle moments you barely notice. One day you wake up feeling more peaceful than before, not because something grand has happened, but because of the thousands of gentle steps you have taken within yourself. Foot in the door is not merely a technique. It is the instinct of change itself. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote in Being and Nothingness, "We are our choices." But those choices are rarely large. Most are so small we consider them insignificant, and precisely because they are small, we easily accept them. And in accepting them, we carve a new pathway in the mind. Step by step, almost imperceptibly, we become someone different. This also happens in relationships. You do not love someone all at once. You love them through the small things they do, the way they smile, the way they say your name, the way they listen, the way they remember something you thought they had forgotten. Foot in the door unfolds quietly, even in love. The little things open the door for the larger feelings to bloom. You trust someone not because of a single grand gesture, but because of countless small moments in which you felt safe. And then, one day, You realize you have stepped fully into their world without noticing when it happened. But like all psychological techniques, foot in the door carries two sides, both gentle and dangerous. Manipulators also use it. They do not ask for much at first. They ask for a little time, a little attention, a small concession, and once you say yes the first time, you begin saying yes again. Not because you want to, but because your mind wants to remain consistent with itself. Yesterday's agreement becomes leverage for today's agreement. This is why the technique forms the foundation of many subtle forms of manipulation. And yet, tonight, as we look at it through the lens of philosophy and healing, we do not see only the danger. We see the gentle truth beneath. Every great change begins with a small beginning. When we learn to notice the small beginnings, we can recognize who is trying to open a door we do not want to open, and we also learn to open the doors we truly wish to open. Foot in the door helps us understand ourselves more deeply. It reveals that the heart does not open through force, but through gentle repetition. You cannot force yourself to heal in one night, but you can give yourself a single breath of ease, and then another, and another day without self-judgment, and another moment of choosing kindness over harshness. And then one day, your heart no longer hurts the way it once did, not because you forgot, but because you opened enough spaces inside yourself for healing to take root. This is the foot in the door of recovery. Slow, gentle, steady, like drops of water forming a stream, like even breaths forming peace, like small steps forming a long journey you once never believed you could walk. And now, as the tenderness of part 7 spreads through you like warm light over the skin, we drift toward another psychological technique, one that stands in direct contrast to this one, yet completes it like yin completes yang. Because if foot in the door persuades through softness, the next technique persuades through excess. If foot in the door begins with the smallest request, the next one begins with something overwhelming, only to soften later, guiding you into saying yes to far more than you expected. And as the reflections on foot in the door from part 7 continue to soften inside you like a slow warmth spreading through your fingers on a cold night, you may begin to notice something quietly fascinating. The human mind does not respond only to gentle openings. It also reacts intensely to initial overwhelm. We soften before the small, but we also bend before the excessive when it is delivered at the right moment, in the right way. The mind contains thresholds, breaking points, and paradoxical rules. Touch the right one, and it opens in ways you never expected. And at the boundary between excess and surrender, a psychological technique emerges. Bold yet subtle, persuasive yet strangely cooperative. This is the door in the face technique, where one offers a request so large it is certain to be rejected, only to follow it with a smaller, more reasonable request that the listener almost cannot refuse. If foot in the door opens the door with a gentle push, door in the face knocks hard first, so that afterward, even the lightest touch is enough for the door to swing open. In social psychology, this technique works through one deeply human rule, the rule of reciprocity. When someone asks for something far beyond your ability and then immediately lowers the request, you feel that they have made a concession, and in return, something inside you wants to concede as well. The mind, always seeking relational balance, nudges you to say, "All right." Not because you plan to agree, but because the exchange feels fair. When someone softens, we soften. When they step back, we step back, and the persuasion feels less like pressure, more like cooperation. But to understand this technique more deeply, we must go beyond its strategic use and look at it through the lens of human nature itself. Door in the face is powerful, not because of manipulation, but because of how the soul responds to refusal, guilt, and relief. Humans dislike the discomfort of saying no, and when given an opportunity to feel better, less guilty, less selfish, less harsh, we often take it. We do not only want to be reasonable, we want to be good. Nietzsche, in Human, All Too Human, wrote, "We are always more afraid than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." When someone makes a huge request, we fear looking cold or unkind. We fear judgment, we fear failing to meet expectations. But when the request is immediately reduced, that fear dissolves, and the relief we feel makes us more willing to accept the smaller ask. This is not weakness. This is the natural rhythm of human interaction. We seek harmony, balance, and mutual easing. The strangest part, however, is that door in the face does not exist only in communication with others. It exists in the conversations we have with ourselves. Think of the unreasonable demands you have once placed on your own heart. I must be strong immediately. I must heal right now. I must forget instantly. I must succeed without fail. And when you inevitably cannot meet these impossible expectations, you blame yourself. But slowly, gently, something inside you revises the request. All right, then just be a little softer today than yesterday. Just one small step. Just one slow breath. Just stop hurting yourself for a moment. And you accept that smaller request easily. Because you know deep down, the first demand was never realistic. Your own soul used door in the face on you, pushing you towards something manageable only after showing you what was impossible. This reveals a tender truth. Within you live two voices. One demands greatness immediately. The other understands that change is built from small steps, slow breaths, gentle allowances. When the first voice collapses under its own weight, the second emerges, and you follow it with ease, just as anyone accepts the smaller request after rejecting the larger. This is how your spirit preserves itself, remains soft, remains alive. Door in the face also explains how humans learn forgiveness. When someone hurts you deeply, forgiveness is too large a request, too heavy, too unrealistic. You cannot grant it immediately. But over time, they show small changes, small gestures, small softening. They lower the request without ever saying so. And one day, you accept something small, not full forgiveness, but perhaps a quiet willingness to no longer carry the burden. Not because they deserve it, but because your heart needs peace. Forgiveness, too, is a door in the face. You reject the impossible, yet open slowly to the gentle. Thus, this technique is more than a persuasion strategy. It is a mirror of how the mind seeks balance between desire and capacity, between hope and reality, between pride and compassion. It is the psyche's way of protecting itself from overwhelm by adjusting what it can accept. And when you feel this in the slow rhythm of your breath, in the soft settling of your thoughts after a long day, you realize that door in the face is not threatening. It is a reminder that humans change through release, not pressure. That large transformations need time, and small openings prepare the way. That every door, no matter how heavy, can open, not with force, but with understanding. Now, as you lie in the quiet of this night, your mind already attuned to the gentle cadence of these philosophical reflections, we drift toward a new psychological terrain, where persuasion is no longer about requests or negotiation, but about the distortions of perception itself. A place where the mind deceives its own vision, where humans are shaped not only by external influence, but by the hidden beliefs living deep within. And as the final echoes of the door in the face technique from Part 8 drift softly through your mind, like the gentle click of a door closing after a tender conversation, you may begin to feel something subtle rising within you, the realization that human beings are not guided solely by external requests, but by invisible internal currents far more powerful. If foot in the door showed how the soul opens one small step at a time, and door in the face revealed how we react to concession and relief, then stepping into part 9 brings us face to face with something deeper than both. A mechanism rooted so far inside the psyche that it shapes not only how we decide, but how we see. A mechanism that convinces us we are perceiving truth, when in reality, we are seeing the version of truth our minds quietly chose long before we noticed. This is confirmation bias, one of the most silent yet most powerful mental traps humans fall into. And as you let your breath sink one tier deeper, you may feel that what we are about to touch is nothing less than the way your own mind has been hiding you from yourself. Confirmation. Bias is the psychological tendency for people to seek, remember, and trust only the information that confirms their existing beliefs, while ignoring, minimizing, or discarding information that contradicts them. It sounds like a flaw of logic, but in truth, it is rooted in identity, emotion, and safety. Humans do not seek truth. Humans seek consistency. We believe what we have believed. We like what we have always liked. And we see the world through lenses that were tinted long ago. Sometimes in childhood, sometimes through wounds we no longer speak of. Thus, confirmation bias is not merely a cognitive distortion. It is a fragment of the soul's reflection. Epictetus once said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." Enchiridion. We do not suffer because of what happens, but because of how we interpret what happens, and our interpretations are shaped by pre-existing beliefs, emotional sediment, and stories we have told ourselves long before we were aware of them. Think of a time when you believed someone was kinder or better than they truly were. You saw in them what you wanted to see, not what they showed. You ignored the signals, dismissed your intuition, overlooked small inconsistencies, not because you were naive, but because you wished to protect the beautiful picture your mind had drawn. In the same way, pessimists often see life as a chain of disappointments, not because their circumstances are worse, but because their minds gather only the evidence that fits their belief, discarding anything that contradicts it. The human mind is like a vast library, but it keeps the lights on only for the shelves it wants to read. And when we look deeper, we see that confirmation bias does not merely distort perception. It shapes how we love, whom we choose, and how we navigate relationships. If you believe someone is suspicious of you, you will focus only on the signs that confirm it. A glance, a vague tone, a delayed reply while disregarding everything benign or loving. Meanwhile, the person may simply be busy, distracted, or thinking of something entirely unrelated. But confirmation bias turns you into a collector of evidence to reinforce your fear rather than a seeker of truth. In love, we see those we cherish not through clear eyes, but through eyes tinted by expectation, fear, hope, and past wounds. If you fear abandonment, your mind exaggerates any sign that resembles withdrawal, while filtering out the gestures of devotion that don't fit that narrative. If you believe you are unworthy, you will interpret the world in ways that reinforce that belief, choosing relationships that hurt you, staying in places that diminish you, shaping your life in the image of a truth your mind quietly constructed long ago. In this way, confirmation bias becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, a story a mind tells until life bends to match it. Nietzsche once wrote in The Gay Science, We hear only those questions for which we are able to find answers. The mind hears only what it is prepared to believe. And in the quiet of night, when you listen to this thought through slow, steady breaths, you may realize that every person lives in a unique perceptual universe. Each person selects their truth in ways that feel safest to them. Each person sees the world not as it is, but as they are. Confirmation. Bias is also why humans resist change. Once beliefs have roots, the mind builds an entire system to defend them. It selects information, interprets it, and clears away anything that threatens the foundation. It becomes the loyal gatekeeper of identity. A gatekeeper so faithful it locks out new truths, even the ones that could free you from suffering. But there is something unexpectedly gentle in all of this. When you understand that the mind filters information to protect your sense of self, you begin to soften toward yourself. You understand why you misjudged people, why you clung to painful beliefs, why you overlooked signs or held on to illusions. Not because you were weak, but because your mind was performing the duty it believed necessary, protecting you from chaos. And in the moment you forgive yourself for having been guided by confirmation bias, your breath becomes lighter and something inside loosens. You begin to understand that change does not come from forcing the mind to see the truth, but from loosening the rigidity with which it chooses truth. When you learn to question your own beliefs, when you open yourself to curiosity, when you allow yourself to be wrong, to see again, to learn again, you begin stepping out of the perceptual cage your mind built around you. This is the deepest healing of confirmation bias, not fighting old beliefs, but gently creating space for new ones to enter. And now, as your mind softens, as your thoughts begin to flow as slowly as the breath of someone drifting toward peaceful sleep, we continue our journey into the night, toward a psychological mechanism where the very first impression, no matter how meaningless, can tilt your entire judgment. And as the reflections on confirmation bias from Part 9 continue to drift gently through your mind, like a thin mist softening the surface of still water, you may begin to sense that the human psyche is shaped not only by the information it selectively keeps, but also by the very first impression it encounters. We do not see the world objectively. We see it through the imprint left by the initial moment our mind quietly anchors itself to. If confirmation bias makes us see only what we expect to see, anchoring bias makes us see everything through the lens of what came first. And as your thoughts slow into a warm, steady breath filling the night air, we step into anchoring bias, the power of the first impression, where a mental anchor dropped in the first second holds fast to all your judgments afterward, often so tightly that you cannot pull it free. Anchoring bias is the psychological phenomenon in which people cling to the very first piece of information they encounter, even if that information is irrelevant, and use it as the reference point for all future evaluations. Like a ship lowering its anchor into the sea, your mind anchors itself to whatever it meets first, and once that anchor has settled, every movement that follows is tethered to it. No matter how much you try to see broadly or clearly, the invisible chain pulls your thoughts slightly off course. This may sound simple, but the consequences are profound. It shapes the way you see a person you've just met. It shapes how you assess value, meaning, truth. It shapes the way you interpret events. It even shapes the way you see yourself in the mirror. And often, it shapes your life far more than any grand decision you believe you consciously made. Søren Kierkegaard once wrote in Either Or, "Once you label me, you negate me. Once you attach an initial label to someone, you close the door to seeing who they truly are. And that first label rarely reflects truth. It is merely an anchor." If you meet someone who appears cold, your mind drops its anchor there. From that moment on, you interpret every gesture as coldness, even if they are simply thoughtful, tired, introverted, or quietly kind. You don't see them, you see your anchor. What is even more striking is that this anchor does not only arise when you look at others, it arises when you look at yourself. If at some moment in your past, someone told you that you were not enough, not smart enough, not beautiful enough, not deserving enough, you may have dropped an anchor into your own heart. That anchor makes you second-guess your successes. It makes you doubt compliments. It shrinks you in the face of opportunity. Not because you lack worth, but because you are chained to the first belief you ever accepted about yourself. Anchoring bias, then, is not just a psychological phenomenon. It is a wound, a shadow, a prophecy whispered before you even understood its meaning. But if you breathe slowly and look deeper, you will notice something hopeful. Anchors can be strong, but they are not immovable. They hold only because you hold them. They persist only because you believe in them. They remain invisible only because you never dare to look directly at them. And once you understand that an anchor is not a truth, only a beginning, you realize you can shift it. Change the anchor, and your entire inner world tilts in a new direction. That is a form of freedom. In a classic experiment, two groups of people were asked the same question: how many countries are in Africa? But first, one group was asked whether the number was larger than 10, while the other was asked whether it was larger than 60. The results were astonishing. The first group estimated far fewer countries than the second, even though the final question was identical. Their minds had anchored themselves to the initial number. This shows that sometimes the world you think you see is nothing more than the echo of something random that came before it. In relationships, anchoring grows even more potent. A person who makes a good first impression becomes easy to forgive later. Not because their actions are justified, but because your anchor is, this person is kind. Conversely, someone who leaves a poor first impression may struggle to show their true self, because your anchor whispers interpretations that distort your vision. The impression says nothing absolute about who they are, only about where your mind chose to drop its anchor. Inside you, this effect is even deeper. Your first experience of love may become an anchor for every relationship afterward. Your first memory of pain may become an anchor for every fear you carry. And if you have ever been deeply hurt, your mind may have dropped an anchor that says, love is dangerous, or people will leave, or I am unworthy. And with that anchor, you interpret every interaction through the same quiet, heavy bias. But in the tranquility of night, where breathing grows deeper, where the spirit softens, you can begin to see the anchors you overlooked during the day. You can notice the invisible rope tugging at your emotions. You can recognize the conclusions that your first impressions silently carved. And you can gently ask yourself, is this truly reality, or is this an anchor I never removed? You do not need to change immediately. You only need to loosen the rope a little, to admit that sometimes the first thing you believe no longer fits the person you are becoming. And when you free even one anchor, you do not just liberate your perception, you open a wider, brighter sky within the mind. Now, as you drift along this calm, contemplative river of thought, like a small boat carried softly toward the horizon, we begin moving toward another psychological realm. One where attraction and decision-making emerge not from logic, but from ancient instincts, where humans make judgments in seconds without understanding why. And as the lingering reflections of anchoring bias from Part 10 settle like a thin veil of mist across the surface of your awareness, you begin to notice something delicate. even though the mind is easily guided by the anchor of the first information it encounters. There are also moments that require no information at all, no words, no reasoning. Sometimes a single glance, a breath, a faint shift of energy is enough for the heart to decide. Not through logic, not through memory, not through deliberate thought, but through something primal, instinctive, and mysterious. The kind of force that makes you feel drawn to someone at the very first moment without fully understanding why. And as this stream of contemplation carries you deeper into the quiet of the night, we enter instant likability, the psychology of first glance attraction, where connection happens without preparation, without analysis, as if your soul recognizes something long before the mind can name it. There are people you meet whom you like instantly, not because they say anything profound, not because they perform any impressive gesture, but simply because they have something, an indefinable quality. Perhaps it is the softness in their breath, the calm in their gaze, the gentle ease in their posture, the subtle tilt of the head, or the quiet presence with which they listen. But deeper than all of these, perhaps it is their energy, that invisible aura you cannot see with your eyes, but feel with your entire being. Psychologists say that humans decide whether they like someone within the first 100 milliseconds, a fraction of a second, a blink, a slice of time so thin it could almost be nothing. This alone reveals that instant likability is not a decision of the intellect, but of instinct, of intuition, of the ancient regions of the brain formed long before the evolution of logic. Nietzsche once wrote in "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy," a line that fits this phenomenon so well. The body knows before the mind, emotion knows before thought, instinct knows before interpretation. It is as if your entire nervous system recognizes something essential in the other person, something familiar, something resonant, long before you consciously understand what it is. And that is what makes instant likability so beautiful. It needs no explanation. As you lie quietly in the softness of the night, you may recall a moment when you met someone who felt instantly safe, someone whose presence calmed you without effort, someone before whom your heart opened like a flower toward light. They were not perfect, but something in their energy made you feel seen, soothed, understood, as if your soul remembered them from somewhere beyond time. Instant likability is also a form of reflection, not of behavior, but of essence. We often like people who carry a piece of ourselves within them, a piece we lost, forgot, long for, or are slowly returning to. A gentle person reminds you that gentleness still exists within you. A confident person awakens a buried confidence in your own chest. A quiet person softens your thoughts. A joyful person warms the room inside your heart. We do not like people because of who they are. We like them because of what they awaken in us. And the miracle is, it is never random. The soul does not choose wrong. It senses energetic compatibility long before the mind begins its examination. When you like someone instantly, it is not merely an emotion. It is resonance, a moment where two frequencies align, two breaths harmonize, two unseen orbits meet. In love, this phenomenon becomes even stronger. Perhaps you have met someone who made you think, there is something about this person, though you could not name what it was. When they looked at you, the world softened. When they spoke, you felt more yourself. When they smiled, something warm unfurled inside your chest. None of these are coincidences. This is your frequency meeting theirs. Rilke once wrote in Letters to a Young Poet, "At the bottom of every person's heart, there lies a secret longing for a peaceful world. An instant likability touches exactly that longing. the craving for a space where we can breathe more freely, where defenses fall away, where we feel gently held. Through a philosophical lens, instant likability reveals a profound truth. Humans connect through presence, not performance, through energy, not perfection, through the invisible atmosphere of who they are when they are not trying to be anything at all. Yet, like all psychological phenomena, it carries its shadow. When we are attracted too quickly, we may idealize the other person, painting them in the soft glow of our hopes rather than the reality of who they are. And when time eventually reveals the full picture, we may feel pain, not because they deceived us, but because we saw them through the luminous haze of the first moment. But this is not the fault of instant likability. It is simply the way the heart works. Swift, deep, emotional, childlike in its innocence. Understanding this frees us. We no longer fear the pull of a first impression. Instead, we cherish it as a gift, a beginning, not a conclusion, an invitation, not a verdict, a doorway, not the entire home. And now, as warmth spreads gently through your chest like a soft blanket in the night, and your mind drifts into deeper relaxation, this contemplative stream will guide you toward the next realm of human psychology. A place where the craving for attention, the surges of intermittent dopamine, and the inconsistency of reward create some of the most intricate emotional addictions within the human heart. And as the gentle sensations of instant likability from Part 11 continue to expand within you like circular ripples moving outward across a quiet midnight lake, you begin to sense that human connection is not defined solely by the first moment of encounter, but is continuously shaped and sometimes fractured by another kind of energy, one more complex, more unpredictable, and more deeply rooted in the fragile architecture of the human heart. It is a force that even the strongest mind can easily fall into, a rhythm of closeness and distance, warmth and coldness, tenderness and neglect, the very inconsistency that makes it dangerously enchanting. This is where we step into the craving effect, the addiction to inconsistent attention, a realm where uneven affection becomes a dopamine-rich pattern the mind clings to without ever realizing it has been captured. In the quiet of the night, as these words drift toward you like soft breaths, you will notice that this phenomenon is far from unfamiliar. It appears in the relationships that make you feel lifted one moment and abandoned the next, in conversations that make you smile today and lie awake tomorrow, in messages sent passionately when someone is excited and forgotten when their mood shifts, in moments of sudden tenderness followed by long, aching silences that leave you questioning your worth. All of these inconsistent waves create emotional loops stronger than any chemical substance. The craving effect is rooted in an ancient psychological truth. People do not become addicted to attention. They become addicted to unpredictable attention. When you never know when someone will draw close or pull away, speak or fall silent, hold you or vanish, when you do not know which version of them you will encounter next, your mind slips into a constant state of anticipation. And it is that anticipation, not the affection itself, that triggers dopamine more powerfully than consistent care ever could. Uncertainty is the most seductive architect of longing. Psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered that the highest level of addiction arises from variable ratio reinforcement. Rewards that come unpredictably, sporadically, without pattern. This is why humans become attached to gambling, to risky games, to uncertain chances. And heartbreakingly, the same mechanism operates in relationships. You're not addicted to the person. You are addicted to the unpredictability of their affection. Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "Is it not madness to desire the same things again and again? Yet humans do exactly that, not because we want repetition, but because the emotional cycle never feels complete. The craving effect works this way. You stay not because the relationship is stable, but because you always believe that tomorrow they will be different. Tomorrow they will be gentle again. Tomorrow they will remember you. Tomorrow they will return. Your mind hangs on the trembling thread of hope, and dopamine is the hook that holds you there. What's surprising is that those who trigger this kind of craving often have no intention of doing so. They are simply moving according to their own emotional tides, affectionate when they feel connected, distant when they feel overwhelmed, warm when they seek closeness, cold when they need space. And you, sensitive, open-hearted, longing to understand, interpret every fluctuation as a statement about your worth. But the craving effect has nothing to do with worth. It is only about inconsistency. Sometimes the pain you feel is not caused by their absence, but by the memory of their presence. You do not miss the coldness. You miss the warmth. You do not miss the silence. You miss the days they filled your world with words. You do not miss their leaving. You miss the times they stayed. It is the contrast that binds your heart, like a rope you accidentally tied around yourself during the most beautiful moments. And if you listen closely within this still moment, you will feel the truth rising. Your mind is not addicted to that person. It is addicted to the change in them, to the unpredictability, to the hope for a small signal, to the possibility that the warmth might return, to the dopamine rush, not the love itself. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In the craving effect, your unconscious drives far more than you realize, and when you fail to notice it, you mistake emotional patterns for destiny. But once you see the mechanism clearly, it begins to release you. You see the loop. You see your hunger. You see what activates the ache. And that awareness becomes the first doorway to healing. The beauty of the craving effect is that it reveals your heart is not weak. It is simply longing for affirmation, connection, emotional rhythm. Sometimes it confuses the source with the feeling, holding on to the person because it does not know how to hold on to the emotion alone. But once you understand this, you can separate the two. You can keep the beautiful feeling and let go of the person who brought it. You can keep the softness and release the chaos. You can keep the memory and free yourself from the pain. Because what you are addicted to is not them. It is the version of yourself that felt loved in their presence. And the craving effect whispers a quiet truth. Your heart deserves consistency. Your soul deserves steadiness. You are not born to chase unpredictable affection or to shrink yourself into waiting. You deserve warmth that does not disappear, attention that does not require guessing, presence that does not need pleading, and love that does not come coated in fear. And when you inhale slowly, now, you will feel everything inside you returning to its natural rhythm. Not the rhythm of another person's mood, but the rhythm of your own deep, steady aliveness. And now, as your mind settles softly into this understanding of emotional dependency and inconsistent attention, we will continue drifting toward another psychological realm, one where silence speaks louder than words, where the space between gestures can carry more power than any spoken argument. This will be the doorway into Part 13, the silent grammar of the body. And as the lingering resonance of the craving effect from Part 12 continues circling through your mind like a tide of emotion not yet fully dissolved, you begin to sense something profoundly natural. What binds us, what captivates us, what we become addicted to is not only words, not only inconsistent affection, but the subtle movements of another person, those tiny, nearly invisible signals that slip past conscious analysis and touch the unconscious directly, leaving impressions far quicker and deeper than anything spoken aloud. And as your breath slows, as the light of your awareness softens, you enter another philosophical terrain, the silent grammar of body language, a realm where the human body speaks truths the mouth is unwilling to reveal, where posture, gaze, shoulders, breath, the tilt of a head or the quiet folding of one's hands expose realities more honest than any phrase could ever portray. Body language, in its most literal sense, is a languageur, one we use long before we learn to speak and continue to use even in silence. The strange beauty of it lies in this: the body always tells the truth, especially in moments when words try to hide it. The mind can craft masks, the voice can disguise, but the body has never once learned how to lie. Everything you try not to feel, every thought you refuse to face, every emotion you suppress leaks through the shoulders, the eyes, the breath, the openness or closing of your hands. Without speaking, your body narrates your story. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "There is no such thing as a soul without a body, and indeed, the soul rarely stands apart from the flesh. It lives within every small movement you make without thinking. When you do not trust someone, your body leans back almost imperceptibly. When you feel safe, your shoulders drop, your neck softens, your gaze loosens and opens. When you like someone, you instinctively incline toward them. When you're hurting, your eyes drift away, your breath shortens. Every truth has a shape. Behavioral researchers claim that 55% of all communication is body language, 38% is tone, and only 7% is actual words, which means 93% of truth lives outside of language. And if you pay attention, you will realize that in the most important moments of your life, confessions, breakups, declarations of love, moments of vulnerability, it is the body, not the words, that reaches the heart first. When someone looks at you with an unhurried gaze, you feel safe. When someone turns away while lying, you sense the fracture immediately. When someone lowers their head, closes their shoulders, you know they're hurting long before they manage to say, "I'm fine." Sometimes even a gentle touch on your shoulder can soothe days of exhaustion in ways speech cannot. Rilke once wrote in Letters to a Young Poet, "No feeling is final, yet the body records every feeling as it arises, like footnotes left by the soul along the margins of the present moment." Body language is the way emotion carves itself into reality, the mirror of mood, fear, yearning, love, and connection. It is the poetry of the unconscious, the silent voice of the spirit. And perhaps the most beautiful aspect of body language is that it allows us to see the real person, not the version they present, but the version they involuntarily reveal. This honesty makes body language one of the most vital keys to understanding one another. Think back to a moment when you knew someone was sad within seconds of seeing them, without asking, without listening, simply by reading the way they entered the room, the way they held their bag, the angle of their gaze. Or recall a moment when someone felt warm to you, not because of what they said, but because of the quiet brightness in their eyes when they looked at you, a brightness that said you mattered, that you were seen, that you were welcome. And if you have ever loved someone deeply, you understand this truth better than any theory. Love is always visible in the smallest movements. The way they glance at you when they think you're not looking, the way they fix your collar, the way their hand rests gently on your back as you cross the street, the way they tilt their head slightly to hear you better, the way they sit closer without noticing. Real care exists not in grand declarations, but in what the body does without being asked. Yet body language also has a darker shadow. You know this too. The moments when someone stops meeting your eyes, the slight retreat of their shoulders, the folding of arms like an invisible barrier, the tension rising in their posture when you enter the room. These small signs often break the heart more deeply than silence ever could, because the body speaks what the heart tries to hide. But this is not meant to sadden you. It is meant to remind you that you always know. The mind may deceive you, but the body, yours and theirs, never does. Truth, no matter how soft, always touches the skin. In this knowing, healing begins. When you notice your shoulders tightening around someone, you realize your soul is protecting itself, and you can listen to its need. When you catch your breath shortening near someone, you understand your body is saying what your mind has not dared to say. And when you find yourself relaxing completely in the presence of someone, you know you are in the right place, aligned with the right rhythm, resonating at the right frequency. The silent grammar of body language teaches that to understand others, you must listen with your heart, not just your ears. And to understand yourself, you must observe your body before interpreting your emotions, for the body is the soul's most honest mirror. And now, in the quiet of the night, as your own breath becomes softer, deeper, steadier, allow this awareness to settle gently into every cell. Know that your body is telling your story, a story that becomes clearer in moments of stillness like this. From this foundation, we will continue our journey tonight, stepping toward another psychological domain, where silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a subtle instrument of connection, a force capable of dissolving defenses and opening the heart. And this will lead us into part 14, the power of silence. And as the quiet reflections on the silent grammar of the body from part 13 continue settling within you like warmth lingering on the skin after a gentle touch, you begin to notice something deeper. If the body can speak truth through unconscious movement, then silence, a phenomenon even smaller than movement, often speaks the loudest of all. Silence is the sound of everything that cannot be spoken, the space that holds emotions too vast for language, the absence of noise that somehow echoes more forcefully than any voice could. And as your mind softens, slows, and smooths itself like the still surface of night water, this is the moment we step into the power of silence, when quiet becomes a weapon, where silence is no longer a pause but a subtle force that shapes the mind of anyone standing within it, revealing more than they ever planned to show, a power no one can see, yet everyone feels. Silence, in its deepest essence, is a form of communication, but its strangeness lies in the fact that it exerts influence not by transmitting messages, but by creating space. Psychologists have long observed an intriguing phenomenon. When two people are speaking and one of them suddenly stops, the other almost always feels compelled to fill the silence. Not because they have something meaningful to say, but because the emptiness between words feels unbearable. Silence becomes a psychological vacuum, drawing thoughts out of the other person, causing them to speak more, reveal more, unravel more. In Eastern philosophy, especially in Zen, silence is regarded as a pure form of energy. Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "Silence is a source of great strength. Its strength does not lie in force, but in its ability to make people confront themselves. For without sound to distract the mind, the inner voices begin to speak." But in social psychology, silence holds another force: pressure. When you stay silent after someone says something, their mind begins spinning. What are they thinking? Are they judging me? Did I say something wrong? Should I explain more? These questions do not need to be asked. The other person asks them themselves, answers them themselves, digs deeper into their own thoughts without you having to utter a single word. Silence does all the heavy lifting. Silence magnifies every uncertainty inside a person. Freud once wrote in The Interpretation of Dreams, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. When someone is placed in silence, their unspoken emotions begin to rise, surfacing like memories that refuse to be forgotten." This is why therapeutic silence, the deliberate quiet in therapy, often matters more than any question. When the therapist goes quiet, the client begins to descend deeper into themselves, as though silence is a lamp illuminating hidden layers of the psyche. In everyday life, silence is also a tool full of weight. Someone may not respond right away because they want you to face the truth you've been avoiding. Someone may remain silent after your explanation because they want to see what else you will reveal. Someone may hold silence after a difficult question because they want you to confront your fear. And in love, silence can be the greatest test of connection, not because the person doesn't care, but because silence exposes what words cannot. You may realize that silence can make the heart beat faster than anger ever could. A delayed response of just a few seconds can make your mind spiral for hours. A silent stare can make you feel seen through. A long, unbroken quiet between two people can carry more weight than 100 sentences. The paradox is this: we fear silence, yet only in silence do we hear the truth. And when you look even deeper, you will see that silence has two faces. It can heal and it can harm. It can be a sanctuary that helps you breathe, or a blade that forces you to confront the thoughts you've been afraid to speak. The silence of warmth makes you feel safe. The silence of coldness makes you feel small. The silence of understanding makes you feel seen. The silence of indifference makes you feel invisible. But there is a gentle truth. Silence is never meaningless. It always communicates something. The question is whether we choose to listen. Silence also reveals who we are. Our reaction to silence does not come from the other person. It arises from the most vulnerable region of our own heart. If silence makes you anxious, perhaps you've been abandoned. If it makes you angry, perhaps you've been dismissed. If it makes you peaceful, perhaps you've learned to stand within your own inner ground. And when we learn to use silence properly, it becomes a subtle power. You no longer need to rush to respond to show you're listening. You no longer need to reply instantly to prove your presence. You no longer need to argue to assert your truth. And you no longer need to fill every empty space to keep tension at bay. For sometimes, that empty space is exactly where honesty begins. Ancient Chinese philosophers called silence the threshold where the quiet soul steps into truth. Modern psychologists call it the cognitive space without defenses. And in nights like this, as you listen to these slow words, silence becomes an invisible embrace, holding your mind, soothing the aching parts of you, opening doors you did not know were waiting to be opened. And as your awareness touches this stillness, we move toward another corner of psychology, where asking for help is not merely receiving support, but a counterintuitive strategy that causes others to love you more. A curious paradox of the mind where giving creates attachment. This is the doorway into part 15, the Benjamin Franklin effect. And as the echoes of silence from part 14 continue drifting gently through your mind, like the last soft ripples dissolving across a still midnight lake, you begin to recognize something deeper. Silence does not merely reveal people to themselves. It opens a vast space where the invisible threads connecting human beings become easier to see. When sound fades and words sink beneath the quiet, you start to perceive the delicate strands that bind us, not through logic, but through action. And sometimes, hidden inside those tiny actions lies a curious psychological paradox. When someone helps you, even in the smallest way, they begin to like you more, not because of anything you did, but because their own mind must explain why they acted with kindness. And to resolve that inner tension, the brain chooses the simplest story. I helped them because I like them. This is where we enter the Benjamin Franklin effect, one of the most subtle and beautiful paradoxes of human psychology. A place where helping becomes an invisible glue that draws two hearts closer. The effect originates from a true story Franklin shared in the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. He wrote about a politician who disliked him. Franklin did not try to win him over with gifts or flattery. Instead, he used an unexpected strategy. He asked to borrow a rare book. The man agreed. Days later, Franklin returned it with a humble note of gratitude. From that moment onward, the formerly hostile man became surprisingly warm and friendly. Franklin observed, "He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another." Once someone has helped you, they become more inclined to help again, not because you have changed, but because their conscious image of themselves must remain consistent. If I helped them, I must like them. The paradox is this: people like you not because you help them, but because they help you. When someone does something for you, their mind seeks a reason. And the easiest, most emotionally coherent explanation is, I like this person. Thus, a simple act of kindness transforms into a subtle emotional bond. In the quiet of this night, as these words drift slowly like the breath of someone slipping into sleep, you can see that this effect is not merely a psychological trick. It is a miniature portrait of human connection itself. We bond through action. We grow attached to the people we give our time to, the people we care for, the people we worry about, the people we sit beside in moments of uncertainty. When we give something of ourselves, our attention, our kindness, our presence, a small gift, a gentle gesture, our heart naturally aligns itself closer to them. In relationships, this becomes especially clear. You often grow fond of someone not because they do everything for you, but because you have done things for them. When you worry for someone, when you comfort them, when you stay up late just to listen, your mind records every small act and concludes, I did this because they matter to me. And so your bond deepens. If you have ever asked yourself, why can't I let this person go? Look to this effect. Perhaps you cannot let go, not because they did so much for you, but because you did so much for them. Every message you sent, every moment you waited, every touch of care, every night spent listening, your mind catalogued it all, and from it formed the belief, I must care for them deeply. Aristotle wrote in Nicomachean Ethics, we are what we repeatedly do. And in relationships, this truth becomes even more profound. We love what we tend to. We attach to what we nurture. We value whom we invest ourselves in. The Benjamin Franklin effect reflects this deeply. But within its light, a shadow appears. Manipulators use this effect skillfully. They make you help them, sacrifice for them, give to them, believing that the more you invest, the more you will convince yourself that you care. By drawing effort out of you, they tie you to them. Not with what they give, but with what they make you give. And this makes leaving far harder. But once you understand this mechanism, you begin to see yourself clearly within it. You recognize that your feelings for someone are not just emotions. They are shaped by your actions, and you have the power to withdraw those actions if you sense that you are giving too much or being pulled into an unhealthy loop. Yet you should not view the Benjamin Franklin effect with fear. At its deepest level, it is a reflection of something beautiful. It shows that human beings connect through kindness. When you help someone, you do not merely impact their world. You open a doorway inside yourself, a doorway of empathy, of tenderness, of emotional presence. In those moments of offering kindness, you become a softer version of yourself, and when you feel that softness, you naturally view the other person with warmth. In quiet nights like this one, as these words flow like a gentle stream, you may recall the times you felt closer to someone simply because you did something small for them. Comforting a friend through sadness, caring for someone when they were ill, listening to the story a stranger could not tell anyone else, choosing compassion instead of judgment. These were the moments your heart opened, not because they were deserving, but because kindness wished to exist through you. And in that opening, you realized something important. People are bonded not by grand gestures, but by small acts of care. Small attentions, small offerings, small moments of presence, small threads of tenderness. These tiny moments weave together to form the fabric of great love. Now, as your mind becomes smooth and still like a quiet surface of water, as your breath slows and deepens, we drift toward another realm of thought. A place where the contradictions of human consciousness reveal themselves in seemingly harmless statements, where belief and logic collide to form paradox. This is where we enter Part 16, the Consciousness Paradox. And as the reflections of the Benjamin Franklin effect in Part 15 continue to glow faintly within your mind, like the warmth lingering on your palm after a gentle act of kindness, you begin to realize that all the psychological mechanisms we have traveled through, from mirroring to instant attraction, to the craving for inconsistent attention, to the quiet force of silence, all revolve around one very small, yet infinitely deep center: consciousness itself. Without consciousness, no emotion could exist, no attachment could form, no wound could reach the heart, no healing could ever be felt. Consciousness is the gateway through which human beings experience the world, and at the same time the most mysterious door that philosophy and science have yet to fully open. And now, as your mind softens, widens, and sinks into the gentle quiet of the night, we step into one of the most profound questions the human species has ever faced: the paradox of consciousness. Why does a mass of electrochemical matter produce subjective experience? The moment you ask this question, you touch one of the great paradoxes of both philosophy and neuroscience. How can electrical impulses, ion flows, neurotransmitters, things that are purely material, give rise to emotions, memories, sorrow, joy, longing, love, or the layered, intricate sense of I? How does a soft organ weighing barely 4 kilograms suddenly become aware of itself? Why does it feel pain? Why does it feel love? Why does it feel sadness? Why does it wonder about its own nature? What transforms a biological structure into something that can contemplate its own existence? Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness, a term David Chalmers introduced in 1995. But the question haunted humanity centuries before. René Descartes, in Meditations, declared, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am. But what he truly opened was not the question of existence, but the mystery of awareness itself. Why does the mind know that it is thinking? If the brain simply follows physical laws, why does physics know the sorrow you feel? Why do painful memories make your chest tighten? Why can a melody bring you to tears? Why can a soft gaze make you feel warm inside? No scientific instrument can measure nostalgia or heartbreak, because these are not physical objects. They are experiences. So, where do experiences come from? William James, the father of modern psychology, wrote in The Principles of Psychology, "Consciousness is the still water in which the stream of experience flows. Consciousness is the quiet lake where every sensation settles, where every memory becomes a ripple, where your inner life takes shape." Consider a simple moment of awareness, watching a sunset fade slowly into the horizon. The warmth of orange, the haze of purple, the stillness of the sky. These are not just chemical reactions firing in your brain. They are experiences, vivid and deeply felt, known only to you. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. The sunset returns, not on your retina, but within the luminous field of your inner world. In this sense, consciousness is not merely brain activity. It is a space, a field in which the universe is recreated, where memories revive themselves, where dreams bloom, where emotions rise and dissolve. And tonight, as you drift with these slow philosophical currents, you are touching that very space. It is difficult to accept that everything we feel, the trembling in your chest when a story moves you, the tightness in your throat when you remember someone who left, the peace that settles through your body when you hear rain, could be nothing more than electricity in the brain. If the mental world is merely the output of matter, then why is matter so beautiful? Why does it tell stories? Why does it create you? Science describes the brain as a machine. Consciousness turns that machine into a universe. Nietzsche wrote in The Will to Power, "There is no truth, only interpretations." But he left unsaid the deeper question: who is the interpreter? When a flower blooms, biology explains the process, but consciousness gives it beauty. When a song plays, acoustics explains the vibrations, but consciousness gives it meaning. When you remember someone you love, neuroscience explains the neural pathways, but consciousness gives it ache, texture, color. Consciousness turns an indifferent world into a world filled with significance. And yet, precisely because it is so deeply mysterious, consciousness births paradox after paradox. One of the greatest is this: consciousness cannot be proven, only experienced. You cannot show your consciousness to anyone. No one knows how you see red. No one knows how music lives inside you. No one knows what your love feels like. Consciousness is intensely subjective, yet it is the truest thing you possess. And that is the paradox that defies material law. The truest reality is the one no instrument can measure. Modern philosophers call this the explanatory gap, the unbridgeable gulf between brain activity and lived experience. But perhaps this gap exists not to frustrate us, but to remind us that life is not only physical, it is also sacred, mysterious, and luminous. Consciousness is what keeps you alive, not simply as a biological organism, but as a soul. In the gentle quiet of this night, you may feel consciousness more clearly than at any other time. When sound dims, when thoughts slow, when breath settles into a deep and steady rhythm, you recognize that consciousness is not just awareness, it is presence. It is the inner flame no one can extinguish. It is the small, steady light inside you that time cannot touch. And as you sense that light flickering softly within, you drift toward the next realm of this philosophical journey, where the gap between matter and mind becomes an even greater mystery. The place that opens into part 17, the explanatory gap, the unfillable distance between the brain and experience. And as the reflections of the paradox of consciousness from part 16 continue to echo within you like the lingering vibration of a final chord refusing to fade, you begin to realize something profoundly natural. The deeper we look into the nature of consciousness, the more clearly we see a strange gulf between what science can describe and what we actually experience. It is like staring at a map of a city and believing you understand the city itself. Until the moment you walk through its narrow alleys, feel the wind brushing the tops of the trees, smell the scent of warm bread drifting from a bakery at dawn, or sit quietly as night settles over everything, and then you suddenly understand the truth. The map is not the city. And consciousness is exactly like that. Science can describe every neural pathway, every electrical reaction, every chemical release, every region of the brain that lights up when you see, hear, ache, remember. But it cannot tell you what sadness feels like from the inside, how joy trembles through your chest, or what the warmth of love truly tastes like in the realm of your inner world. This is where we enter the explanatory gap, the unbridgeable distance between the physical brain and subjective experience. This gap is not a flaw in science. It is the natural limit of description. The brain belongs to the world of matter. Experience belongs to the world of the mind. One is physical, measurable, observable. The other is private, intimate, impossible to quantify. And between these two worlds lies a chasm that no research, no scan, no theory has ever been able to fully cross. Philosopher Thomas Nagel, in his famous essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" introduced a question that shook the foundations of modern philosophy. What is it like? You can study the brain of a bat in perfect detail, but you will never know what it feels like to be a bat. This is the absolute difference between understanding structure and understanding experience. In everyday life, we touch this gap more often than we think. Consider sadness. Science can tell you that sadness activates the limbic system, releases cortisol, reduces serotonin. But that tells you nothing about what sadness truly is. Your sadness may be a dull ache in your chest, a long breath you didn't know you were holding, a hollow heaviness in your stomach, a space you fall into where time slows and your heart feels like stone. No graph captures this, no chemical equation translates it, and that is the explanatory gap, the place where science stops and experience begins. Yet this gap is not something to mourn. It is part of what makes human beings beautiful. If everything inside you could be measured, you would no longer be you. You would just be a machine. The immeasurability of experience is what makes the human mind deep. The mystery of consciousness is what makes life meaningful. The inexplicability of emotion is what makes love sacred. The explanatory gap is not a flaw. It is a doorway into the most mystical part of being human. Remember a quiet afternoon when you watched the rain fall. Science can describe scattered light, falling droplets, acoustic vibrations, but it cannot tell you why that moment filled you with peace, why that sound softened your breath, or why the scent of wet earth awakened a childhood memory. That cannot be measured. Because feelings do not live in the brain or in the body. They live in the space between the two, where your physical self touches your spiritual self. And here, another paradox emerges. The more science learns about the brain, the deeper the mystery of consciousness becomes. We know neurons fire through synapses. We know dopamine brings pleasure. We know oxytocin creates closeness. We know adrenaline heightens sensation. But we do not know what love is. We do not know where longing comes from. We do not know why the feeling of being loved can lift or ruin an entire life. Because these are not neuronal events. They are experiential realities. As philosopher David Chalmers said, even if we know every physical fact, the subjective fact remains unexplained. And this is exactly where philosophy, psychology, and art meet. Artists capture sadness in color. Poets translate it into words, philosophers reason through it, but none can fully describe sadness because every person inhabits it differently. The explanatory gap also appears in relationships. You cannot explain why you love someone, you cannot define why you miss them. You cannot articulate why you hurt because of them. And when healing comes, you cannot pinpoint the exact moment it began. All of it happens in the gap, the space between brain and experience. In nights like this, when you listen to these slow, meditative words like a soft breath drifting across your awareness, you can feel this gap more vividly than ever. No one knows what you feel right now, how your mind is settling, how your heart is softening, how your breath melts into the deep quiet of the night. I do not know. No one knows. But you know, and that knowing makes you a singular being in the universe, irreplaceable, unrepeatable, impossible to replicate. And because you know, because you feel, you exist in the most beautiful way, as a soul experiencing the world through your own private, shimmering consciousness. The explanatory gap reminds us that life is a mystery, that the most important parts of being human cannot be displayed on an MRI or captured by an EEG, that the I, the one listening to the story, is too vast to be contained in formulas. And as this understanding spreads through you like a thin mist settling gently across the surface of your mind, this journey will carry you deeper into an even stranger realm, where the brain not only fails to explain experience, but actively edits reality itself. And that opens the doorway to part 18. Reality editing. How the brain rewrites the world. And as the reflections of the explanatory gap from part 17 continue drifting like a thin, pale cloud suspended in the sky of your inner world, where the distance between brain and experience becomes a soft, ungraspable mist, you begin to realize something even more astonishing. Not only is there a gap between neural activity and subjective experience, but even the experience you believe you are having is never the original version. Everything is rebuilt. Everything is edited. Everything is reconstructed through layers of memory, emotion, and interpretation. Perhaps this is the deepest truth in this entire journey. Human beings do not live in reality. They live in the version of reality their brain recreates for them. And as you let your breath slow, as your body loosens as if dissolving into the quiet of the night, we step gently into reality editing. How the brain reconstructs the world, where every image, every memory, every emotion you once believed was real, is revealed to be the product of a silent, intricate editing process unfolding behind the curtains of consciousness. Think for a moment about vision, the sense most people trust without hesitation. You see the sky, the trees, the faces of those you love, the street outside your home, the golden outline of sunlight. But what if you learned that your eyes receive only a crude, incomplete fragment of the world? Everything after that is reconstructed by the brain. The image you see is not the world itself, but the best guess your brain composes after processing billions of signals. Nearly 90% of the information used to create what you see does not come from the eyes at all. It comes from internal prediction, memory, and pattern building, which means that when you look at a flower, you are not truly seeing that flower. You are seeing the version of the flower your brain considers most likely. The philosopher Immanuel Kant once wrote in Critique of Pure Reason, "We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are." And this is not merely philosophical poetry. It is the conclusion of modern neuroscience. You never see the world directly. You see the world as reconstructed by the machinery of your mind. And vision is only the beginning. Memory is edited even more. This may be uncomfortable to accept, but it is the truth. You have never recalled a memory exactly as it happened. Every retrieval is a reconstruction, and every reconstruction changes the memory. Memory is not a film stored safely in a box. It is a manuscript rewritten each time you open it. Even the memories you believe you remember flawlessly. Someone's eyes, a farewell at dusk, a painful sentence spoken long ago, may be altered, distorted, or embellished by the brain to make sense of your present emotional landscape. Sigmund Freud once said, "The mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master." And nowhere is that clearer than in how the mind edits memory. It changes the story to protect you from pain. It changes the story to preserve your sense of self. It changes the story to keep your world coherent. And sometimes it changes the story so you can survive. But the deepest reconstruction of all is not of images or memories. It is of emotion. We think emotions are raw, immediate, original. But emotions, too, are interpretations. The brain does not simply feel, it interprets, judges, and assigns meaning, then produces the feeling. A sentence wounds you not because of the sentence itself, but because of the story you attach to it. A glance makes you anxious not because it carries meaning, but because your mind imagines one. Even longing is not a natural response. It is a memory reconstructed with an emotional tag the brain insists on attaching. Reality editing reveals a strange paradox. Human beings do not inhabit the same reality. Two people standing before the same scene may see entirely different worlds. Two people hearing the same words may feel two opposing meanings. Two people remembering the same moment may live in two different histories. This is not a flaw, it is a survival mechanism. If the raw world were delivered into your mind unfiltered, the overwhelm would shatter you. The brain edits, selects, deletes, fills gaps, and constructs meaning not to deceive you, but to make life livable. And then, when night falls and you lie quietly listening to these words drift across your awareness like soft waves touching the shore, you begin to understand that reality editing is not merely a biological process, it is a spiritual journey. Because if the brain can reconstruct the world, then you too can learn to reconstruct your world in gentler, kinder, softer ways. You can choose to interpret events with compassion. You can choose to view pain as a passage rather than a prison. You can choose to reinterpret old memories as chapters, not cages. You can choose to view yourself through the eyes of understanding rather than judgment. And here lies the most healing power of reality editing. If the mind can distort to protect you, it can also re-edit to free you. You can rewrite how you hold your wounds. You can reshape what your past means. You can rebuild the image you carry of yourself, not through denial, but through tenderness. And in that deep softness, you realize something essential. Everything you feel is only a temporary version of reality. It can change, it can be rewritten, it can be healed. And now, as you recognize that the brain does not merely receive the world but actively recreates it, we begin to move toward a realm of ancient philosophy, where human beings, thousands of years ago, already understood that what we see is only the shadow of truth. This is the doorway that leads us toward Part 19, Plato's allegory of the cave, where reality becomes only a projection on a wall, and the journey out of darkness becomes a timeless metaphor for awakening the inner self. And as the contemplations of reality editing from Part 18 continue to settle inside you like a soft veil of mist over consciousness, a place where the outer world and the inner world blend and dissolve through the subtle edits your mind performs without your knowing, you begin to realize something even more profound. perhaps human beings have never truly seen reality as it is. We do not see what exists. We see only what the mind permits. We do not experience the world itself. We experience the interpretation we construct of it. And in the quiet moment of recognizing that truth, the mind opens an ancient doorway leading into one of the greatest metaphors in the history of philosophy. Plato's allegory of the cave. The story of shadows dancing across a wall, of truth hidden behind illusion, and of the painful yet transformative journey of those who dare to step out of the darkness and walk toward the light. In the Republic, Plato describes human beings bound inside a cave since birth, unable to turn their heads, forced to look only at the wall before them. Behind them, a fire burns, casting the shadows of objects carried by unseen figures, and those imprisoned souls, having never seen anything except silhouettes flickering on stone, believe those shadows to be the whole world. To them, the shadows are truth. The shadows are reality. The shadows are everything. Pause for a moment and let that ancient phrase echo through the night. Shadows of reality. Something in those words makes your heart soften a little, like a gentle reminder that perhaps you too have lived inside a version of the world filtered by memory, emotion, and perception, the way the cave prisoners saw the world through shadows alone. Plato writes that one day a prisoner is freed. At first, the fire burns his eyes, the light hurts. Then, as he is led out of the cave, the sun blinds him. The brightness pierces him with pain. He wants to turn back. He longs for the darkness he knew. He wants the comfort of the familiar illusions. This is the paradox of awakening. The light always hurts at first, because truth is not something the mind absorbs gently. Truth disrupts old beliefs, shakes familiar certainties, and asks us to loosen the safety we have clung to for so long. And just like that freed prisoner, human beings often prefer returning to the shadows rather than confronting what the light reveals. But then, slowly, his eyes adjust. He begins to see shapes, colors, depth, movement, not shadows, but the world itself. He sees the faces of people instead of their silhouettes. He sees the sky instead of its flicker. He sees life rather than its echo. And in that moment, he understands that everything he once believed was only a distorted version of reality. When he returns to the cave to tell the others, they laugh at him. They mock him. Some even become hostile. Not because they are unkind, but because they cannot comprehend the truth he carries. They have never seen it. To eyes accustomed to darkness, light looks like madness. To minds accustomed to illusion, truth looks like threat. And in this way, Plato's cave is not only a metaphor for reality, it is a metaphor for human psychology. Every bias we explored, every distortion, every mental reconstruction pulls us back toward the safety of shadows. The cave is the mind's comfort zone. The light is the mind's transformation. In love, you have walked out of a cave before. You once believed someone was a certain kind of person, only to discover they were entirely different from the image you had painted. Seeing the truth hurt at first. You wanted to turn away, to return to the familiar shadow of who you thought they were. But slowly, painfully, you adjusted. You learned. You grew. In grief, the cave appears too. For a long time, you may have avoided your sorrow, believing that not looking at it kept you safe. But one night, maybe a night like this one, you turned toward it and found that facing the truth was less frightening than you imagined. Even in healing, Plato's cave whispers its wisdom. No one steps into the light before they are ready. Light is not just truth. Light is maturity, and maturity always arrives with a sting before it brings peace. Yet once you have seen the light, you can never fully return to the old shadows. That is the beauty of Plato's allegory. It does not force you to leave the cave. It merely asks you a gentle question in this quiet hour. Am I looking at shadows or at the truth? And if you are looking at shadows, that is not wrong. Humans need the shadows to feel safe. But one day, when your heart is ready, when your spirit is steady, you will walk a little closer to the light. Not all at once, just enough to see that the world is far larger than the wall you once believed was everything. And when you do, you will discover that the light is not harsh at all. It is soft, it is warm. It is like a gentle morning sun brushing your face. And now, as your mind drifts across a calm inner lake, as the radiance of Plato's vision settles into you like a quiet glow, we continue this journey into an even more delicate realm of thought, a place where words and beliefs clash, where logic contradicts the emotions beneath it, where a person might say something aloud that their inner truth does not agree with. And as the final rays of Plato's allegory of the cave from part 19 linger in your mind, like the last sliver of sunlight resting on warm stone, you begin to feel a very natural shift. When you start to doubt the shadows on the wall, when you tilt your head ever so slightly toward real light, when you find yourself stepping away from old beliefs, that is also the moment you need a different kind of lantern. Not one that blinds like the sun outside the cave, but one that illuminates from within. A method for looking into yourself, into the things you think you know, into the things you never questioned, into the truths you have grown too familiar with to examine. And this is where you step into the world of Socratic questioning, where Socrates, the man who wrote nothing yet laid the foundation for all critical thought, teaches us that the right question can open an entire universe inside the soul. Socrates often said, "The unexamined life is not worth living. A life not questioned, not reflected upon, not held up to the light, is a life lived by habit, by shadows, by the stories others built for you." And against the backdrop of Plato's cave, his words echo like a call within the darkness. Turn back, look closer, ask why is this true? Why do I believe this? The moment you begin to ask is the moment you begin to be free. Socratic questioning is not argument. It is not proving someone wrong. The beauty of this method lies in its simplicity. It does not seek answers. It seeks the truth beneath answers. Socrates believed that people are not foolish because they lack knowledge, but because they mistake assumption for knowledge. And that false certainty is the chain that binds you inside the cave. People believe the shadows are truth. People believe others' expectations define their path. People believe their sadness is their essence. People believe they must be this, think this, live this. But if you ask slowly, gently, are you sure? The entire world you lean on may begin to crumble, and that collapse is the beginning of freedom. Though Socratic questioning is traditionally divided into 6 types of inquiry, you do not need to memorize them. You only need to feel the spirit behind them. Intellectual freedom begins when you doubt your own thoughts. Imagine yourself sitting in the cave's darkness, watching shadows move across the wall. You believe they are real. But when you ask, why do I think this? Who told me this? Is this supported by evidence? You loosen the first chain on your wrist. One question unlocks one link. 2 questions unlock another. And by the 10th question, light begins to appear. Socrates does not give you truth. He teaches you to see truth for yourself. This method is like holding a small candle inside the dark room of your inner world. When you ask, why am I sad? You begin to see the reasons you once avoided. When you ask, what am I afraid of? You begin to see the shape of old memories. When you ask, Do I want this, or do I want what others told me to want? You begin to return to the core of who you are. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, but you cannot find your why unless you ask." These questions illuminate not only the world outside, but also the world within. The world where your deepest beliefs sleep, where your oldest wounds whisper, where your unnamed desires wait. Socratic questioning is also a path of healing. When you ask yourself gently, you stop judging, stop forcing, stop demanding. You simply observe, you listen, you feel, you soften, you open. You begin to understand yourself with a kindness you did not know you possessed. Imagine speaking to your heart the way Socrates spoke to his companions. You ask it, "Why do you hurt?" And your heart, silent for so long, begins to answer, not with words, but with a faint warmth moving through your chest. You ask it, "What do you want?" And you feel a subtle trembling, like the softest whisper rising in the night. You ask it, "What are you running from?" And you discover the truth is never as frightening as you thought. It was only waiting to be acknowledged. Socratic questioning teaches that all truth can be found when you dare to ask and dare to wait. Truth is never in a hurry. It does not argue. It simply waits for the noise to fade. This method also teaches a deeply human virtue, humility. Socrates was considered the wisest of Athens not because he knew much, but because he alone dared to say, "I know that I know nothing." Recognizing one's limits is the beginning of wisdom. Your life mirrors this. When you believe you already know everything, about yourself, about others, about the world, you become the prisoners in the cave, motionless before the shadows. But when you whisper to yourself, "Perhaps I don't understand everything. Perhaps there is another angle. Perhaps I should ask more. Perhaps I am mistaken. Perhaps there is more to learn," you step beyond your inner chains and walk toward a gentler kind of light. And in the quiet of this night, as you let these words drift through you like a slow tide, Socratic questioning becomes a companion, gentle, patient, free of judgment. It does not demand you to change. It does not force you to be strong. It simply invites you to look deeper within yourself, softly, calmly, honestly. In that moment, you realize life is wider, softer, more open than you ever imagined. And when you live with the right questions, you no longer fear the darkness, because you have learned how to find light even there. Now, as your mind grows more attuned to this contemplative rhythm, we drift gently toward another realm of ancient thought, where Aristotle stands quietly with a timeless question: what is the purpose of all things? And so we open the door to part 2130, Aristotle and Purpose, the telos of all things, where life unfolds not through the question, "What is it?" but through the question, "What is it for?" And as the gentle echo of Socratic questioning from part 20 continues to linger in your mind, like a faint warmth resting on the surface of consciousness, a quiet reminder that life truly begins only when we dare to ask, dare to see ourselves, and dare to release the illusion of knowing, you begin to realize that the journey out of Plato's cave and the inward gaze of Socrates' method are merely the first two steps across a long bridge of thought, a bridge leading toward a deeper, older, heavier question. All of this, life, humanity, matter, spirit, exists for what? The question rises like an ancient call echoing through the corridors of time, and the one who touched it with the greatest depth, rigor, and quiet sincerity was Aristotle. Student of Plato, yet also the soul who opened a new direction of human understanding. And so, in the softness of the night, While your mind drifts like a small oil lamp floating in still air, we enter the telos of everything, Aristotle's theory of purpose, a place where every being, from the smallest seed to the human soul, carries a purpose within itself, a natural direction, a destination etched into its essence. Aristotle believed that all things possess a telos, a final purpose, an inner end point toward which they naturally grow. In Metaphysics, he wrote, "Nature does nothing in vain. Nature creates nothing meaningless. Everything has a reason to exist. Everything is becoming itself. An acorn's telos is to become an oak. A caterpillar's telos is to become a butterfly. And the telos of a human being is to grow into the most complete, authentic version of themselves." Pause for a moment. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath settle, and allow this truth to move through you. Everything has a purpose. In the modern world, where we are surrounded by endless choices, pressures, expectations, and hurried goals, there is something deeply comforting in remembering that the deepest part of you already has its own natural destination. You do not need to invent it. You only need to return to it. Telos is not a goal assigned by society. Telos is not what you should do or must do. Telos is your natural unfolding, the way water flows toward rivers, the way trees lean toward sunlight, the way your heart moves toward whatever brings it peace. Aristotle looked at the world with such tender precision that he saw purpose in every movement. He believed that to understand anything, one must ask 4 questions. What is it made of? What is its form? Who brought it into being? And, most importantly, what is its telos? The 4th question is the key that opens meaning. You can understand your past, analyze your circumstances, trace every experience that shaped you, but if you do not know where you are heading, a quiet emptiness will always follow you. Many people live their entire lives within that emptiness, simply because they have never discovered their telos. They work, love, fail, try again, keep busy, yet something always feels missing. And sometimes it takes only a still moment like this. A moment where words flow through you like water moving through a quiet night, for you to finally ask, what is my natural purpose? Aristotle never gave a ready-made answer. He offered a direction. He taught that telos does not live in what you possess, but in how your essence unfolds. You cannot force a rose to bloom into a lotus. You cannot make a fish fly like a bird. You cannot turn yourself into something you are not. Your telos is already inside you, waiting for you to notice, waiting for you to come home. Gently, Aristotle invites us to look at ourselves the way a gardener looks at a seed, without pushing, without forcing, only observing how it grows in its own rhythm. And in that soft observation, you begin to understand that your telos is not to become the most successful, the best, the most admired, or the perfect one. Your telos is to become yourself in the most beautiful, wholesome, and complete way. Imagine holding a small acorn in your hand. On the outside, it looks ordinary, but inside is the blueprint of a mighty oak. Inside you, too, lies a blueprint, one that cannot be stolen, replaced, or erased, only forgotten. And in this quiet night, within the rhythm of your calm breathing, you are beginning to remember. Aristotle believed that when a person lives according to their telos, they reach eudaimonia, the blossoming of the soul, the state the Greeks called flourishing. It is not fleeting joy, not momentary excitement, but a long, steady, grounded peace, like a leaf finding its right sunlight, a river finding its way to the sea, a bird finding the wind that carries it home. Eudaimonia is what happens when you live in the right direction, aligned with your inner truth. In today's world, where everything rushes, where we are pulled by countless expectations, where social pressures create impossible shapes for us to chase, Aristotle gently reminds us that life becomes far simpler when we return to one question. What is my telos? Not what do others want from me? Not what must I achieve, but what does my own nature wish to become? Perhaps your telos is kindness. Perhaps it is creativity. Perhaps it is healing. Perhaps it is love. Perhaps it is learning. Perhaps it is peace. Perhaps it is to be a small light in someone's life. Telos does not need to be grand. It simply needs to be true. The more deeply you rest in Aristotle's vision, the more you see that he was not merely a philosopher of logic or classification. He was a philosopher of gentleness, of natural growth, of returning to oneself. And in the quiet of night, you may feel yourself returning too. Returning to a slower rhythm, a deeper breath, a sense that your life still holds a direction more beautiful than anything you've seen so far. And as your telos begins to shimmer like a small light at the edge of your awareness, we gently close part 21 and step toward another realm. A realm where language and belief collide, where humans speak words that contradict what they truly feel, where inner conflicts reveal themselves in subtle paradoxes. And as the lingering warmth of Aristotle from part 21 continues to dissolve gently within your mind, like a soft breeze brushing across a field of quiet leaves, where every being holds a telos, a natural purpose, guiding it toward its fullest unfolding, you begin to see that the journey toward understanding your true essence is not only a path through light, growth, and inner blossoming, but also a descent into the gentler shadows of the psyche, where humans walk a delicate line between what they know and what they believe. It is a region shaped by internal contradictions, by phrases that sound illogical but feel deeply human, as though the mind carries two voices within it, one belonging to reason and the other to the heart. And at times, these two voices speak entirely different languages. As you step further into this landscape, each footfall is soft as a whisper over sand. You begin to see the doorway into a strange and intimate paradox, one you have lived many times without noticing. Moore's paradox, a place where someone can utter a sentence that is logically correct yet psychologically impossible, such as, "I know it's raining, but I don't believe it's raining." A sentence perfectly sound in structure, yet wildly contradictory in lived experience. And within that contradiction lies a deep drawer inside the mind where truths are divided. The truths we know but do not believe, the beliefs we hold without evidence, and the emotions that move in a direction reason cannot follow. It is a world in which a person can hold certainty in their hands while rejecting it in their heart, a contradiction only human consciousness is capable of. To understand Moore's paradox, we must return to something simple. Knowing and believing are not the same. You may know something through evidence, observation, or fact, but belief lives deeper, within memory, emotion, fear, hope. Sometimes these two currents never meet, like two rivers flowing side by side yet never touching. Imagine yourself sitting in a quiet room, hearing rain falling outside the window. You hear the soft tapping against the roof. You know with absolute clarity, it is raining. But a part of you does not believe it, not because you cannot hear it, but because your mind still clings to another version of the world, one where the weather should be dry, where you wish it were different, where your emotional landscape wants another truth. In that moment, you stand between two realities, one belonging to sound and one belonging to desire. Moore's paradox emerges here. when information and belief move in opposite directions, and you have lived this paradox far more often than you realize. You may know someone no longer loves you through distance, through silence, through a coldness that needs no explanation, but you do not want to believe it. You may know a relationship ended long ago, yet your inner belief still clings to a remnant of hope. You may know you tried your best, yet still not believe you are enough. You may know you deserve peace, yet still not believe you are worthy of it. Logic whispers, everything is clear. The heart replies, I don't believe it. Wittgenstein, in Philosophical Investigations, observed this paradox with sharp clarity. Humans can describe truth with words, but cannot force belief to follow those words. Belief does not move through logic. It moves through experience. And often, old experiences are stronger than new evidence. This is why More's paradox is not a logical puzzle. It is a mirror reflecting the incompleteness of the human soul. It shows that we live not only by knowledge, but by emotions, not only by the present, but by memory, not only by truth, but by the stories we craft to protect ourselves. On long nights, when you lie quietly in the dark, More's paradox appears like a soft exhale from your deeper self. You may know life is changing, but your inner core is not yet ready. You may know you are strong, but you do not yet believe you can face what is coming. You may know the sadness will pass, but your heart does not believe it because it still hurts. This paradox is not weakness. It is transformation. When knowing and believing refuse to meet, you are standing at the threshold of change. Every step you take toward truth is a step into the light. If Aristotle taught that everything has a telos, then More's paradox teaches that reaching that telos requires moving through inner conflict. It requires allowing yourself to be uncertain, allowing yourself to feel something different from what you know, allowing yourself the time to adjust belief to truth. The healing power of More's paradox lies in this. Humans are allowed to not believe instantly. Belief needs time. Awareness needs space. The heart needs gentleness. No one is obligated to immediately believe the truth the moment they know it. Belief cannot be forced. It can only be nurtured through light, patience, and honesty with oneself. And as you sit here, listening to these words drift through the night like footsteps along a soft path, you begin to see that More's paradox is not a flaw in the mind. It is the essence of being alive. Humans are the only beings who can know one thing and believe another, and that is what makes us deep, complex, beautiful, and endlessly mysterious. Now, as your breath settles into a slow and steady rhythm, as your thoughts melt gently into the quiet of the night, we continue our journey into a stranger territory, where law itself becomes a tangle of contradiction, where justice creates paradoxes, and where right and wrong mirror each other in impossible symmetry. And as the lingering resonance of More's paradox from part 22 floats softly within your mind, like a thin mist that has not yet dissolved, the sense that a human being can know something is true while their heart refuses to believe it, as though reason and emotion were two parallel rivers destined never to merge, you begin to see yourself slowly approaching a different world. One no longer rooted in psychology or inner experience, but in the realm where logic is supposed to reign supreme, the world of law. Yet it is precisely here, in a place built to divide right from wrong, with sharp, clean lines, where paradox blooms like a strange and delicate flower, revealing a story in which every judgment is both correct and incorrect, where a person becomes trapped within the structure of their own words, and where logic, seemingly so solid, reveals cracks thinner than air, but deeper than silence. This is the paradox of the court, the ancient puzzle involving Protagoras and his student Uthlus, a legal paradox whispered through the centuries since ancient Greece. The story begins simply. Uthlus, a young man longing to learn the art of argument but unable to afford it, seeks out Protagoras, one of the finest sophists of his time. Protagoras agrees to teach him under one condition. Uthlus will pay his fees only after he wins his first case. A clear, fair, reasonable agreement. But life, much like philosophy, always harbors strange twists that only emerge when we look closely enough in moments of stillness like this one, where logic becomes nothing more than a shadow of truth. After completing his training, Uthlus takes on no cases. He sues no one, defends no one, avoids every courtroom entirely, as though intentionally sidestepping the moment that would require him to pay. Eventually, Protagoras sues him, and it is here that the paradox unfolds. Protagoras argues, if he wins the lawsuit, the court will force Uthlus to pay. If Uthlus wins, then by the original agreement, this would count as his first victory, and he should pay as well. Either way, I win, Protagoras declares. But Uthlus responds with a reverse logic just as flawless. If he loses, the court's judgment is that he owes nothing. If he wins, then this case does not count toward the agreement, because it was Protagoras who sued him, not a case he pursued himself. Either way, I do not pay, Uthlus counters. And thus, both are right and both are wrong, an infinite loop with no exit. This paradox seems like a simple intellectual game. But when you look deeper, as deep as one can look only in a night like this, where your mind is soft and open like still water, you realize it mirrors many patterns in human life, promises that contradict themselves, standards we create and then become trapped in, moments when we want one thing but act toward the opposite, or times when we cling so tightly to being right that we forget why we cared in the first place. Like Protagoras and Uthlus, people often argue not to understand each other, but to defend their sense of self. We cling to the letter of our words, but forget their spirit. We insist on winning, unaware that the victory pulls us farther from what we truly need. In relationships, this paradox appears every day. You say, I'm fine when you're breaking. You say, I don't need anyone while longing for a single touch. You say, I've let go while the memories still glow warm inside your chest. You say, I don't care anymore while every small action betrays your heart. Words and feelings drift apart, like two clauses in a self-contradicting contract, correct on the surface, but false at the core. The paradox of the court reminds us that sometimes what is right does not bring truth, and what is wrong is not necessarily unreasonable. That life does not operate through pure logic, but through purpose, context, and the quiet pulse of the heart. What matters is not who wins an argument, but what brings peace to your soul. And as you let yourself float gently in this slow, moving stream of thought, you may begin to see that life is not a problem to be solved, but a journey to be understood, not a contract to obey word for word, but a story to be heard with the heart. When you release the need to be right, you become lighter. When you soften your grip on your own interpretations, life begins to open. And in that tenderness, we drift toward a paradox far deeper than this one, beyond law, beyond logic, into the essence of existence itself, where the greatest question of philosophy awaits. Why does consciousness exist at all? And as the reflections on the paradox of the court still drift gently through your mind, like a thin mist woven between reason and contradiction, you may feel yourself sliding into a deeper layer of existence, where contradictions are no longer found in words or actions, but in the very fabric of living, feeling, and knowing you are here. It is in this quiet depth where the darkness of the night brushes softly against your awareness like a warm hand that we enter one of the greatest mysteries philosophy and modern science have never been able to solve. The hard problem of consciousness, the question of why subjective experience exists at all, and how matter that is silent, cold, and mechanical can somehow feel itself. Pause for a moment and allow your awareness to soften. You hear a piece of music and feel your chest tighten. You watch a sunset and feel your eyes sting. You walk past a familiar place and suddenly remember someone who once meant everything. You close your eyes and feel your breath move slowly through your ribs. Science tells us these are only electrical currents, ions shifting, neurons firing. But that does not explain why sadness has weight, why longing forms a lump in the chest, why a memory carries a smell, or why a melody can hurt. David Chalmers calls this the mystery of subjective experience because even if we understood every physical mechanism of the brain, we would still never understand how activity in matter becomes meaning, emotion, memory, and the inner universe no one else can see. Thomas Nagel wrote in What Is It Like to Be a Bat? That human beings may understand every fact about another creature, yet never grasp what it feels like to be that creature. And this is the unbridgeable line between description and experience. Others may see you cry, but they will never know how the tear feels inside your heart. They may hear you say, "I'm fine," but never sense the heaviness pressing on your lungs. They may know you've been hurt, but they will never know whether that hurt burns or freezes, tightens or spreads. Experience is a private universe, a universe that cannot be measured, photographed, or dissected. This is what makes the hard problem hard. It does not ask how the brain works, but why its workings create an inner light, that subtle glow you are sensing right now as you listen to these words drift by like a slow breath. And if consciousness is this inner light, then experience is the color of that light, something that cannot be extracted, duplicated, or traded. In every moment of life, subjective experience is what makes you different from stone, from plants, from machines. You do not merely exist. You know that you exist. You do not merely hurt. You feel the hurt as yours. You do not merely love. You sense the trembling and gravity of that love. You do not merely remember. You relive the memory with your whole body. In the quiet of night, the hard problem becomes a gentle reminder that a human being is never just matter. We are fragile, private, immeasurable worlds. And as you breathe softly, letting your awareness float between reality and inner life, you may realize something simple and profound. To feel is the quietest miracle of being alive. Now that you've seen a consciousness under this tender light, the journey will lead you toward an even bolder question, whether the self you've held on to your entire life truly exists, or whether it is merely a story the brain tells to keep you from dissolving into infinity. And that is the doorway into part 25, the illusion of self, where identity becomes as soft and shifting as moonlight on water. And as the final echoes of the hard problem of consciousness in part 24 linger softly in your mind like the faint glow of an oil lamp still flickering in a dark room, you may naturally feel that if subjective experience is the deepest mystery of being alive, then the self, the I, you have always assumed to be the center of every feeling, thought, and memory, is perhaps the second greatest mystery. For when you realize that sadness, longing, joy, loneliness are all just waves rising and falling on the surface of awareness, you begin to wonder, If consciousness is the lake, then what is its shore? What creates the feeling that I am the one experiencing all of this? What makes you believe you are a stable entity with clear boundaries and a continuous story? And in the very moment this question appears, gentle yet weighty, you step into one of the most startling discoveries in modern psychology and philosophy. The illusion of self, where the I is no longer the solid protagonist of your life, but an image woven from memory, emotion, habit, and countless fleeting impressions. Let your mind soften for a moment, allow old beliefs to loosen, and feel this. The I you refer to with so many sentences. I'm like this, I've always been this way, I can't change, I can't forget, I am who I am, might be nothing more than a story the brain repeats to itself in order to create stability in a world that is always shifting. The philosopher David Hume, in A Treatise of Human Nature, wrote, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception." He said that every time he went looking for the self, all he ever found were sensations, thoughts, memories, but never a solid soul behind them. From this, he concluded that the self is merely a bundle of perceptions, a shifting collection of experiences. This realization can feel dizzying, like standing before the sea and suddenly noticing that the horizon has no fixed point. But if you look slowly, gently, deeply, you'll see this is not a denial. It is a release. You are not bound to a fixed version of yourself. You can change. You can become a new story. You're not obligated to forever identify with your old mistakes, your old wounds, or the memories that cling to the corners of your heart. Because all of those are fragments, not you. Think of memory. Every time you remember something, you are not watching a stored film. You are recreating it. You add emotion. You tint it with the present moment. You adjust the details to match the story you now believe about your life. The brain is not an archive. It is a storyteller. It takes bits of memory, blends them with feeling, sprinkles in current beliefs, and retells a narrative that seems coherent. And that narrative is what gives rise to the sensation of a continuous I. But this I changes every day, even every hour. What you loved at age 10, at age 20, and now may be completely different. What once wounded you deeply may now be something you look back on with quiet acceptance. People once at the center of your world may now be distant shadows, not because you betrayed your past, but because you changed. The brain changed, your thoughts changed, your emotions changed, and so the I changed with them. But because the mind needs stability to survive, it weaves a story that all this change belongs to a single identity: me. This is why the self is the mind's most beautiful illusion. It protects you, stabilizes you, allows you to understand the long arc of your life. In neuroscience, many researchers call the self the brain's narrative center. It doesn't control you. It simply narrates what has already happened and stitches events into a seemingly unbroken thread. But that thread is imaginary. You are not the person you were yesterday. You are not the person you were 10 years ago. You are not even the person you were an hour ago. Your brain has shifted. Your emotions have shifted. Your perspective has shifted. And so the I is a river, not a rock. The Buddha expressed this through the doctrine of anatta, non-self, saying that a human being is like a flame. It appears constant, but in truth it is a continuous motion of fuel and time. The flame of yesterday is not the flame of today, yet we give them the same name. The self is the same, an ongoing process disguised as a single thing. And in Western philosophy, Nietzsche echoed this when he wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The self is a fiction, a plaything of many little selves. We do not have one self. We have countless selves. The self that laughs is not the self that cries. The self that loves is not the self that has lost hope. The self that feels strong is not the self that is afraid. But we place them all in a single box and label it me. In a night as still as this, when your awareness drifts gently with the flow of these words like water moving in the dark, you may feel this more clearly than ever. You are not the story you've told about yourself. You are not your old pain, not your old mistakes, not your old failures, not the voices of others. These are merely chapters. You are the one who sees those chapters, and the one who sees, the one who knows, who feels, who witnesses, has no shape, no age, no name. It is pure awareness. And when you understand that the self is only an illusion, you begin to feel lighter. You no longer need to cling to any identity. You no longer need to maintain any mask. You no longer need to carry the heavy past everywhere you go. You can set it down, and when you set it down, you begin to taste what the entire journey has been guiding you toward: freedom. Now, with the self seen under the gentle light of night, the path will lead you into the realm of memory, where you will discover that even the thing you once believed to be the most solid, the most vivid, the most unquestionably true, is itself a reconstruction, not a recording. And that is the doorway into part 26. Memory illusion. Memory as recreation, not storage. And as the idea of the self in part 25 continues dissolving inside you like moonlight slowly spreading across the still surface of a quiet lake, as you begin to sense that the ego is merely a story the brain tells to create the feeling of continuity and stability, you will feel yourself drifting naturally toward another region of the inner world, where an even more delicate and persistent illusion is quietly at work. An illusion almost everyone believes without question: memory. For if the self is a narrative being constantly rewritten, then memory is the raw material from which that narrative is woven. And when you look closely into the nature of memory, you will discover a truth both gentle and astonishing. Memory illusion. Memory is not storage, but recreation. Every time you remember something, you rewrite the past. Let your awareness soften a little and try to feel this fully. What you believe you remember clearly, what you swear you will never forget, what you insist happened exactly like that, may never have existed in the exact shape you think. Memory is not a photograph stored in a locked drawer. It is a draft pulled out and revised each time you touch it, each time you think about it, each time you tell it to someone else. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus once said, "Memory works like a Wikipedia page. You can edit it, and so can other people." Memory is a living wiki. You revise it, and life revises it too. And each revision feels as though you are remembering correctly, when in reality, you're creating a new version of what once happened. Think for a moment about a childhood memory you've held on to. A warm day, a burst of laughter, a painful scolding, a goodbye, or a moment when you felt deeply loved. Are you certain it is still intact, untouched, preserved exactly as it was? Neuroscience tells us that each time a memory is recalled, the brain lifts it out of temporary storage, softens it, and writes it back down again. And while it is soft, your current emotions, current beliefs, current fears can stain it with new colors. This means you never relive the past, you create it. The brain is not concerned with objective truth. It is concerned with keeping your personal narrative coherent. And so memory may expand, shrink, distort, beautify, or darken, not to deceive you, but to harmonize with the version of you that exists today. In Confessions, Augustine wrote, "Memory is the present of the past. The past exists only in the form you reconstruct in the present, shaped by the person you are now, not the person you once were when the event occurred." That is why the memory of something that happened when you were 10 and the memory of that same event when you recall it at 30 are in truth two different experiences. One is an event, the other is a story. And in quiet nights like this one, that truth becomes a soft reminder that even the painful memories you carry may no longer reflect what actually happened. They may be heavier because you've added years of fear, wound, longing, or regret onto them. And the beautiful memories you cling to may shine brighter because loneliness or yearning has colored them over time. Memory does not mirror events, it mirrors the heart that recalls them. This happens not only with significant memories, but with the smallest ones as well. You may remember someone saying something that hurt you, but you cannot be certain they said exactly those words. Perhaps you heard it through the lens of your emotional state at the time. You may remember someone making you happy, but perhaps it was not their action alone. Perhaps your expectations illuminated the moment. You may remember being weak, foolish, unworthy. But that, too, is merely your story about your past self, not an objective truth. Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "The past is as elastic as the finest rubber. The past stretches, it bends, it reshapes itself according to the force you place upon it. Sometimes the force of fear, sometimes longing, sometimes hope, sometimes self-blame. And because the past is elastic, people often become trapped in memories they believe are absolute. We suffer for things that may no longer exist in the form we recall. We fear shadows that may belong more to our emotions than to the original event. We cling to moments that may not have been as perfect as we remember them. We punish ourselves for stories the brain has edited to make them hurt more. All because we assume memory equals truth. But if memory is recreation, then this opens a doorway to a gentle kind of healing. You can rewrite the past, not by changing the events, but by changing the way you remember them. A painful memory becomes lighter when viewed with understanding instead of self-blame. A sad memory softens when you acknowledge that you did the best you could at the time. A haunting memory fades when you realize the person you were then is not the person you are now. The brain reconstructs memory, but you can choose the spirit with which it reconstructs it. This is the power of awareness. To observe memory not through fear, but through compassion. Not through judgment, but through tenderness toward your own heart. And the moment you understand that the past has never been fixed, never been as solid as you imagined, something inside you loosens. The memories you carried like heavy stones reveal themselves to be sand. Sand you can let the wind take whenever you are ready. Now, with memories softened into something fluid beneath the moonlight, and with your gaze resting on it with quiet acceptance, this journey will carry you into another realm of the mind. A place where repetition becomes truth, not because it is right, but because the brain finds comfort in familiarity. That is the doorway into part 27, the illusory truth effect, when repetition becomes reality. And as the reflections on memory in part 26 continue drifting quietly through your mind, like the thin trail of smoke rising from a newly lit candle, as you begin to realize that every act of remembering is a rewriting of the past, that memory is never a glass box holding the truth intact, but a living canvas constantly repainted by your emotions, your hopes, and your fears in the present moment, you will start to notice something even deeper. If memory can be rewritten, then belief can be rewritten too. If the brain can reconstruct the past, it can also reconstruct the truth. And sometimes it does so not through logic, not through evidence, but through something far simpler and far more insidious. Repetition. This is when you step into one of psychology's most subtle yet disturbing effects, the illusory truth effect, where anything, even something entirely false, if repeated loudly enough, long enough, and often enough, becomes true inside the human mind. Let your awareness slow down just a little and try to feel this clearly. The brain does not prioritize accuracy. It prioritizes familiarity. What feels familiar feels safe. What feels safe feels believable, and what feels believable becomes true, whether it is true or not. This is why repeated statements hold such unsettling power. They enter the mind like drops of water, small and unthreatening, but slowly carve deep grooves into your perception. Psychologists in the 1970s demonstrated this many times. When a false statement is repeated often enough, people begin to believe it. Not because it makes sense, but because they have heard it so many times that the brain tags it as familiar. And familiar to the brain means probably true. Mark Twain once said a line that science later confirmed. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. A lie spreads faster not because it is strong, but because repetition is fast. Repetition is relentless. Repetition bypasses reason and slips directly into the emotional part of the mind, long before logic wakes up to question it. The illusory truth effect is not limited to politics or media. It lives inside your personal life as well. Think of the sentences you heard so many times that they became truths you never questioned, even if they wounded you. Sentences like, "You're not good enough," "You don't matter," "People don't really need you," "You must be strong," "You must do better," "You'll never change." Each repetition carved deeper. Each repetition felt more familiar. And eventually, they became internal truths, not because they were real, but because you heard them too often, whether from others, from society, or from the echo of your own thoughts. The painful irony is that negative messages repeat more often than positive ones, and because the brain does not decide truth through logic, but through familiarity, harmful words can become core beliefs. You may not remember who said them first or when they began, but you believe them because they were repeated by the world, and then repeated by your own mind for years. The illusory truth effect is the tool of subtle manipulators. They do not persuade through argument. They persuade through rhythm, through repetition, through the steady beat of the same phrases whispered again and again until the mind stops resisting and simply accepts. They don't force belief. They manufacture familiarity. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche wrote, "All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power, not truth. And when seen through the lens of the illusory truth effect, those words become even more unsettling. The one who repeats something most often is the one who shapes your reality. But if falsehood can become truth through repetition, then truth can also become truth the same way. If you choose the right things to repeat to yourself with patience, gentleness, and consistency. This opens a quiet doorway to healing. You can choose the truths you allow your mind to practice. If you repeat, "I am not enough," you will live inside lack. If you repeat, "I don't deserve love," you will shrink yourself. If you repeat, "I can't," you will stop trying. But if you repeat, "I am learning, I am changing, I deserve peace, I am allowed to begin again," then even if those words feel fragile at first, they will slowly become familiar. And when they become familiar, your brain will accept them. And when your brain accepts them, they become inner truth. In the stillness of this night, as you listen to these words drift across your mind like a soft breeze brushing gently through the corners of your thoughts, you may begin to feel that the illusory truth effect is not just a psychological phenomenon, but a gentle reminder. Be cautious with what you hear repeatedly, and be tender with what you repeat to yourself. For every repetition is a brush stroke on the canvas of your soul. And the soul, like memory, is easily rewritten. Now, as you understand how truth itself can be bent and reshaped through repetition, this journey will carry you toward another region of the psyche, a place where unfinished tasks, unresolved moments, and incomplete stories cling stubbornly to the mind, not because they are important, but because the brain cannot let go of what has no ending. And that is the doorway into part 28, the Zeigarnik effect, why the unfinished holds us tight. And as the lingering echoes of the illusory truth effect from part 27 still drift softly through your mind like a distant call, fading slowly into the night, as you gently realize the unsettling power of repetition, that even falsehood can become truth if it is spoken enough, you begin to sense something subtler unfolding within you. Not only can truth be reshaped by familiarity, but the unfinished, the unresolved, the incomplete also binds the mind with an invisible force. And from that realization, you step quietly into one of the strangest and most profound psychological phenomena, the Zeigarnik effect, a place where the mind cannot tolerate open loops, where every task left unfinished hangs in your awareness like an unclosed window, preventing you from fully resting. Allow your breath to slow just a little, letting your thoughts drift like a gentle current, and feel this truth settle into you. Human beings are not only haunted by what they failed to complete, they are haunted by anything left hanging, a message you haven't answered, a sentence you never finished saying, a dream you abandoned, a breakup without closure, a question without an answer, an apology caught in your throat, an opportunity you didn't dare to take. All of these remain in the mind as open loops, making it difficult for your inner world to settle because the brain has a natural bias toward completion. Psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik discovered this effect through something beautifully simple. She noticed that restaurant waiters remembered the orders of tables that had not yet paid with exceptional clarity. But the moment the bill was settled and the task completed, the memory vanished almost instantly. This revealed something profound. The mind holds tightly to the unfinished, but releases what is complete. And more than that, the mind does not merely remember what is unfinished. It demands resolution. That demand creates a subtle psychological tension, a heaviness, a restlessness you may not even realize you're carrying. If you look closely at your own life, you will see that many moments you interpret as anxiety about work, about someone you care for, about the future, are not really about those things. They are about unfinished threads, an email you haven't sent, a decision you haven't made, a truth you haven't admitted, a feeling you haven't allowed yourself to feel all the way through. Your mind keeps all of these open, holding them in a state of suspension, creating a constant background noise, a psychological hum that steals your peace even on days when nothing bad is happening. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nothing is so damaging to the mind as the habit of procrastination." He was not speaking of procrastination as a moral failure, but as a fracture in inner tranquility. Every postponed action is not just left undone in the external world, it remains unclosed in the mind. And the more unclosed loops you carry, the more tightly stretched your inner world becomes, like a net pulled in too many directions. The Zeigarnik effect, then, is not merely a psychological curiosity. It is a quiet explanation for much of the invisible fatigue you carry. You are not exhausted because you do too much. Often, you're exhausted because you have left too many things unfinished. You are not anxious about the future. You're anxious because your past is still open. You are not overwhelmed by a lack of time. You are overwhelmed by unclosed loops echoing softly beneath your awareness. Have you ever wondered why you sometimes cannot sleep, even when your body is tired beyond measure? Why your mind begins to run the moment the world goes quiet, recalling undone tasks, unsaid words, missing pieces, half-formed decisions. This is the Zeigarnik effect. Your brain attempting desperately to close the loops so it can restore your sense of stability. Like a door left ajar that keeps swinging in the wind, refusing to settle, your mind keeps returning to what remains unresolved. But within this lies something unexpectedly beautiful. If the mind is tormented by the unfinished, then completion, closure, release, acceptance becomes a powerful form of healing. You do not need to finish everything. Sometimes you only need to whisper, "I cannot complete this right now," and that is okay. In that moment of acceptance, the loop closes, the tension softens, the noise quiets. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." And yet, if chaos is sometimes necessary for creation, the closing of loops, even small ones, is necessary for peace. You cannot dance in your own mind when too many doors remain open. The Zeigarnik effect also explains why unresolved relationships hold such weight. Breakups without clarity, apologies never spoken, feelings without closure. Humans do not ache because things ended. They ache because things remained unfinished. Endings are periods, unfinished moments are ellipses, and the next line was never written. In a night as still as this one, as your breath slows and your consciousness floats gently between wakefulness and sleep, you may sense your own unfinished pieces rising softly into awareness, not to hurt you, but to show you something. You have the right to close any loop that has exhausted you for too long. You can close it through action, through words, through understanding, through forgiveness, or through letting go. And with each loop you close, no matter how small, you will feel a quiet lightness, as if an old door has finally stopped creaking in the wind. That lightness will carry you forward into the next part of our journey, where human psychology becomes strange in yet another way. We believe we have choices, but most of them are illusions. And that is the doorway into part 29, the illusion of choice. Why freedom is sometimes only a feeling. And as the reflections on the Zeigarnik effect from part 28 continue drifting through your mind like a gentle wind, softly closing the unfinished doors within you, as you recognize that the mind's fixation on open loops has woven itself into almost every corner of your life, you begin to sense another psychological layer emerging, subtler, yet deeply paradoxical. Human beings are not only drawn to what remains incomplete, but are also pulled powerfully toward what they are told they cannot have. And from that mysterious intersection between wanting control and refusing to be controlled, you step into a phenomenon that is both familiar and utterly unpredictable, something profoundly human in its essence. Reverse psychology. The place where the more you are pushed away, the more you want to step forward. The more something is forbidden, the more it glows. The more someone says, "Don't do it," the more a quiet voice inside whispers, "Go ahead." This effect is not merely a childish game. It is the expression of one of the deepest instincts of the human mind, the instinct to protect inner freedom. Let your breath slow, let your thoughts soften, and feel this truth settle warmly into you. Human beings are born with a natural resistance to control. When someone tries to impose something on you, a command, a seemingly harmless warning, even a well-intentioned piece of advice, A part of your mind immediately activates a shield known as psychological reactance. This is the psyche's instinctive defense of freedom, the desire to do the opposite of what feels forced. This is why a child reaches for what they're told not to touch. Why an adult who is told, "Don't think about it," thinks of nothing else. Why forbidden things feel magnetic. Why limits intensify desire. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, "The forbidden is always the sweetest fruit." And modern psychology proves him right. The forbidden blooms inside the mind not because it is inherently better, but because it represents the freedom you fear losing. Reverse psychology does not operate by pressure. It operates by evoking the part of you that protects your autonomy. Think of the small moments of daily life. When someone says, "You definitely can't do that," you suddenly want to prove them wrong. When someone says, "Stop thinking about that person," you think of them even more. When someone says, "Forget it," the memory sharpens. When you tell yourself, "Don't be sad," the sadness grows clearer. This is not weakness. This is your mind defending your right to choose your own emotional path, even when the pressure is only a gentle suggestion. Reverse psychology also shows up in the closest relationships, where the line between love and control becomes thin. When someone says, "You don't need to change," a quiet part of you wants to show you can. When someone says, "If you leave, I won't stop you," the absence of resistance stirs something in your chest. When someone says, "Forget me," the sentence itself becomes the anchor that holds you longer. Not because their words are true, but because your mind reacts to the subtle loss of freedom, the loss of deciding for yourself whether to stay, whether to leave, whether to hold on or let go. Reverse psychology, in matters of the heart, isn't a trick. It is the echo of the human longing to choose one's own direction of love. In ordinary life, this effect shows up in an equally intimate way, in the way you respond to yourself. When you force yourself to be happy, you feel emptier. When you force yourself to be strong, you feel more fragile. When you force yourself to forget, the memory clings tighter. When you forbid yourself to cry, your eyes fill even more. The paradox is gentle but profound. Emotional freedom does not come from suppression. It comes from permission. When you stop trying to sleep, sleep comes. When you stop trying to forget, memories fade. When you stop trying to feel better, your heart slowly opens to genuine comfort. Human psychology, at its core, is a continuous dialogue between desire and resistance. And reverse psychology is the meeting point of these two forces. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. The one who cannot guide themselves will always be guided by the will of others." And the irony is that learning to guide yourself is not always about forcing yourself toward what is right. Sometimes it is about not forcing at all, about allowing yourself the inner freedom to move naturally toward what feels true. In the stillness of tonight, reverse psychology becomes a gentle whisper. The more you forbid yourself from feeling something, the more that feeling will control you. The more you resist an emotion, the bigger it becomes. The more you suppress a part of yourself, the louder it eventually rises. Healing, therefore, does not happen through denial or resistance, but through permission. The permission to be tired, to be fragile, to want what you want, to feel what you feel. Sadness when it arrives, joy when it blooms, memory when it calls. When you stop forbidding, the mind stops resisting, and in that moment, you begin to taste real freedom. And now, as we drift out of the realm of freedom and resistance, the journey leads you softly toward its final chapter, a place where communication becomes a bridge where subtle techniques open doors of trust, connection, and natural influence. And as the echo of reverse psychology from Part 29 continues to drift softly through your mind, like gentle ripples spreading from a small stone dropped into a still lake, as you begin to understand how the human heart forever oscillates between its longing for freedom and its instinctive resistance to control, you find yourself arriving at the final space of this journey. A space where every psychological effect, every paradox, every delicate movement of the mind converges into something deceptively simple, yet profoundly deep: the art of human connection. If the previous parts explored how the mind operates, how memory is reconstructed, how belief bends under repetition, how people resist pressure, then Part 30 is where all of that understanding comes to life. In how we love, how we speak, how we listen, how we reach toward each other with sincerity. Because in the end, beneath the layers of philosophy and psychology, what every human being desires most is connection. Not through manipulation, not through rigid techniques, but through that soft inner light within us, the one no one can see, but everyone can feel. When we talk about advanced techniques of human connection, we are not speaking about persuasion or the tactics of influence. We are speaking about the quiet rhythms of the soul, the small and nearly invisible gestures that open a doorway inside someone's heart. Consider a genuine smile, not one performed with muscles, but one rising softly from the eyes, from the breath, from the subtle relaxing of the face. The human brain can distinguish a real smile from a forced one in less than 300 milliseconds. A real smile signals safety. A false one triggers alertness. That is why true connection begins not with words, but with presence. The presence in your eyes, in your voice, in your breath, in the way your attention does not wander. When you are fully here with someone, they feel it instantly. As Martin Buber wrote, all real living is meeting. Not a meeting of form, but a meeting of presence. And within that meeting, a person's name becomes a quiet key that unlocks trust. When you speak someone's name, softly, sincerely, their brain responds more intensely than to any other sound. Even in moments of sleep or half-conscious drifting, humans respond to the sound of their own name. It is the sound attached to their deepest sense of identity. When you say someone's name, you're saying, "I see you. I know you're here." And in a world where so many feel unseen, this simple recognition becomes a rare gift. Then comes the art of asking open questions. Not questions that guide, but questions that open. When you ask, "Why does that matter to you? How did that make you feel? What do you hope will happen?" You are not pulling someone into your framework. You are offering them space to breathe, to unfold, to be. Open questions are windows, not frames. They do not force someone down one path. They let them walk freely into their own truth. Socrates built his entire philosophy on asking questions, not to prove anything, but to help people see themselves with clarity. He wrote in Apology, "The unexamined life is not worth living, and sometimes one gentle question is enough for a person to examine themselves with a tenderness they have never allowed before." But perhaps the most powerful technique of connection, the quiet core of all deep human bonds, lies in rhythm. The rhythm of your voice, the rhythm of your breath, the rhythm of your silence. The human brain has a remarkable ability called neural entrainment. It synchronizes with the rhythm of the person before it. When someone speaks slowly, you slow down too. When someone breathes evenly, your breathing steadies. When someone is calm, you soften. That is why in sacred moments, simply allowing your heart to quiet itself can quiet the hearts of those around you. True connection does not come from skill, it comes from your internal state. When you are peaceful, others feel safe. When you are genuine, others dare to open. When you stop trying to impress, your presence becomes quietly magnetic. As Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." And kindness in communication begins not with grand gestures, but with the smallest acts. Listening without interrupting, nodding softly to say "I'm here," keeping your gaze gentle when the other person feels fragile, lowering your voice when the story becomes tender. Communication is not in the words, it is in the feeling you leave inside someone. You can say all the right things, but if the other person feels judged or defensive, they will not open. Yet you can speak very little, and if they feel safe in your presence, they will give you the deepest parts of themselves. In the soft stillness of this night, as your mind drifts between wakefulness and sleep, as this narration becomes a warm stream flowing through the deeper layers of your thoughts, you may begin to realize that genuine connection has never been about technique. It has always been about returning to authenticity, returning to presence, returning to the gentleness we tend to forget in the rush of daily life. And from that state, you influence others in the most natural way, not through force, but through peace. This 30-part journey, from philosophical paradoxes to psychological mysteries, from the nature of consciousness to the shadows of perception, from the illusion of self to the subtle art of reaching another heart, forms a quiet circle. And that circle closes here, not with an answer, but with a softness. To connect with anyone else, you must first connect with yourself. In this quiet moment, as your breath slows and the edges of your awareness loosen, you may feel something very gentle. You have walked with every idea in this journey, and they now drift inside you like tiny particles floating in a beam of light. You do not need to understand all of them. You do not need to remember all of them. You simply need to let them be. Softly, silently, peacefully. And as you close your eyes and let sleep come to you like a kind companion, you will carry this stillness, a stillness whispered by philosophy and psychology alike. You deserve this peace.